the rancher, took in 5 runaways. Before winter, then, the sheriff arrived with a warrant. The sheriff's horse has stamped twice on the frozen ground, steam rolling off its nostrils like smoke from a cannon. Sheriff Harlan Pike didn't take off his gloves when he unfolded the paper. He held it out like it might stain him. "By order of the county court," he said, voice flat as a shovel blade, "I have a warrant to take into custody the 5 runaways currently sheltered on your property." Jonah Crow felt the words hit the porch boards before they hit his ears. Behind him, inside the lamplit house, 5 breaths stopped at once. Pike's eyes lifted over Jonah's shoulder, past the door crack, and for one split second, Jonah saw it. Recognition, not of faces, of fear. Before we continue, tell us in the comments from what town you are watching this from. Jonah didn't reach for the warrant. He didn't step aside either. He kept his boots planted on the porch like the wood belonged to him in more ways than paper ever could. "Evening, Sheriff," Jonah said. "That a new kind of winter greeting?" Pike's jaw tightened. "Don't play country politeness with me, Crow. You know what this is." Jonah leaned one shoulder into the doorframe, blocking the thin slice of warmth behind him. "I know you rode out here after sundown, in a storm, without a deputy, which tells me you're either braver than folks say, or you're hoping to handle this quiet." Pike's gaze flicked to the dark yard. The barn crouched like a black animal against the wind. Snow hadn't started yet, but it was coming. Jonah could feel it in his teeth. Pike could too. Everybody out here felt weather like a second pulse. "Quiet ends when men get stupid," Pike said, "and you're pushing your luck." Jonah smiled without showing teeth. "My luck ran out years ago. I've been living on grit ever since." A gust shoved at Pike's coat. He adjusted his stance like he'd rather fight the wind than acknowledge it. "Those kids aren't yours." Jonah's fingers curled around the edge of the door, hard enough to feel the old nail heads under the paint. "They're on my land, under my roof." "They're stolen property," Pike snapped, then caught himself like the words had slipped further than he meant. He took a breath and tried again, colder. "They're wanted, for questioning and for return." "Return to who?" Jonah asked. "Say the name out loud." Pike didn't. His eyes stayed fixed on Jonah's face like if he stared long enough, Jonah would step aside on his own. Inside the house, a board creaked. A tiny sound, but in that silence it was a rifle shot. Jonah didn't look back. He lifted his voice a notch, casual, like he was talking about fence posts and feed. "Sheriff, you want coffee? I got chicory. It won't warm your heart, but it might thaw your hands." "I'm not here to drink," Pike said. "No," Jonah agreed. "You're here to take." Pike's mouth twitched. "You always did think you were the only man in this territory with a spine." Jonah's smile faded. "I'm the only man standing between 5 kids and a winter grave." Pike held the warrant up again. The paper shook, not from fear. His grip was too steady, but from the wind trying to rip it away. "This is signed. You want to argue, you do it in town. Right now, you step aside." Jonah took one slow breath through his nose. He tasted snow that hadn't fallen yet. Then he turned his head just enough to speak into the crack behind him, not looking, not moving. "Stay back," he said quietly, "no matter what you hear." A small voice, barely a whisper, answered from the dark. "Yes, sir." Jonah faced Pike again. "How long you been sitting on that paper?" he asked. Pike's eyes narrowed. "Long enough?" "That's not an answer." Pike's nostrils flared. "Since yesterday morning." Jonah let that land between them. "You waited till night, till the road iced, till you thought I couldn't ride fast enough to make trouble." Pike's lips pressed thin. "I waited till a judge stopped shaking and signed." Jonah's eyebrows lifted. "So you scared him?" "I told him the truth." Jonah leaned forward a fraction, voice low now, the kind of low that made men listen without meaning to. "The truth is you didn't come out here for law. You came out here for peace, because you know if this turns loud, it turns ugly." Pike stared at him, and Jonah stared right back, and the wind kept trying to claw the world apart. Finally Pike said, "Bring them out." Jonah didn't move. "No." Pike's hand slid toward the gun at his hip, not drawing, just reminding. "Don't make me do this." Jonah's voice went hard. "You do this on my porch. You won't like what you become." Pike's eyes flicked again past Jonah's shoulder, toward the thin light, toward the shadow shapes he couldn't quite see. You think hiding them makes you righteous? No, Jonah said. I think feeding them makes me human. For the first time, Pike's stare wavered. Not much. Just enough. You know who's asking for them, he said. Jonah nodded once. That's why they're still breathing. Pike's jaw worked. He looked older in that moment, like the badge had been a wait too long. You can't keep them, he said, quieter now. Winter's coming, and what follows them is worse. Jonah's eyes didn't leave his. Then why'd you ride out here alone? Pike held Jonah's gaze, and for a heartbeat, the sheriff wasn't the law. He was just a man trying to stop a fire with his bare hands. Because, Pike said, I'm giving you one chance to do this without blood. Jonah's throat tightened. And if I don't? Pike lifted the warrant again, like a prayer he didn't believe in. Then I come back at first light with men who do. The wind eased for a second, like it wanted to hear the answer. Jonah swallowed, slow. You got a wife, Pike? Pike blinked, thrown off. What? You got kids? Pike's eyes hardened. Don't you? I'm not threatening, Jonah said. I'm asking if there's anyone waiting on you. Anyone you go home to? Because if there is, you might want to listen careful to what I'm about to say. Pike didn't answer. His hand stayed near his gun. Jonah nodded, like that was answer enough. Those 5 showed up here over the last 3 weeks, Jonah said. Not together, one at a time, like bad news traveling slow. Pike's face didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. You admit it. Jonah's laugh was short and humorless. I admit I opened a door. He spoke like he could still see them. The first was a boy, couldn't have been more than 15, who fell off his horse right in my yard. Didn't ask for help. Tried to crawl to the barn like an animal. He had rope burns on his wrists, so raw the skin was gone. Pike's throat bobbed once. Name, Jonah shook his head. Not yours to have. Pike's eyes flashed. Crow. The second was a girl with a split lip and a black eye. She told me she fell. Then she flinched when I reached for the water bucket. Pike's jaw clenched so tight Jonah could hear it. You should have brought them in, Jonah's voice sharpened. To you or to the people who put those marks on them? Pike looked away just for a heartbeat, and Jonah knew he'd struck the bone. The third was 2 little ones, Jonah went on. Brother and sister. They hid in my hayloft all day before I found them. They hadn't eaten in 2 days. The boy tried to bite me when I offered bread. Pike's mouth tightened. And the 5th. Jonah's gaze dropped just for a moment to Pike's horse's hooves, rhymed with frost. The 5th is the reason you're here. Pike's eyes narrowed. You're protecting a criminal. Jonah's voice went so calm it turned dangerous. I'm protecting kids who ran from something you won't name. The wind rose again, colder now. Snow began as a fine hiss like sand thrown against the dark. Pike pulled his coat tighter. I'm not your enemy, Jonah. Jonah lifted his eyes. Then stop acting like theirs. Silence stretched, filled only by the horse's breathing and the soft beginning of snow. Pike finally shoved the warrant back into his coat. Here's what's going to happen, he said, each word measured. You keep them inside tonight. I'm not tearing children out of a warm house in a storm. Jonah didn't blink. At dawn, Pike continued, you bring them to town, all 5. You walk them into my office. You let me handle the rest. And if I don't? Jonah asked. Pike's voice went flat again, the sheriff coming back over the man. Then I come with deputies in a wagon, and whoever's pulling their strings comes with men of their own, and there won't be room in the road for mercy. Jonah studied him. The sheriff's eyes were steady, but there was a tightness around them that said he'd already seen how this ended if it turned loud. Jonah nodded once. Dawn, he repeated. You'll have them. Pike's shoulders loosened a fraction, like he'd been holding tension in his bones. Good, he said, but it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like dread postponed. He swung up into the saddle, reins creaking. Before he turned the horse, he looked at Jonah again. If you've got any sense left, Pike said, you'll keep your rifle inside tonight. Jonah's eyes stayed on him. If you've got any sense left, Jonah answered, you'll keep your conscience awake. Pike's mouth twitched like he wanted to say something else, something truer, but he didn't. He pulled the horse around and rode off into the dark, the falling snow swallowing him piece by piece until even the hoofbeats sounded like memory. Jonah didn't move until the yard was empty. Then he shut the door and leaned his forehead against the wood for a second, breathing in the heat, the smell of stew and wet wool and fear. When he turned, 5 faces stared at him from the kitchen. They were arranged without meaning to be. Oldest, near the back, youngest, closest to the stove, like instinct had drawn lines of protection. A lanky boy with a healing rope scar around one wrist, a girl with a bruise blooming along her cheekbone. 2 smaller kids huddled together in one chair, sharing one blanket. And the 5th, tall for her age, hair cut uneven like someone had done it in a hurry with a dull blade, standing with her back to the wall, eyes fixed on Jonah, like she expected him to change his mind. No one spoke. Jonah cleared his throat once. "He's gone," he said. The smallest girl let out a breath that sounded like it hurt. The rope scar boy didn't relax. He kept his weight on the balls of his feet, ready to bolt. The tall girl's chin lifted. "You told him yes," she said. Jonah met her eyes. "I told him Dawn." Her gaze didn't flinch. "That's yes." Jonah walked to the stove, lifted the lid off the pot, and stirred like the motion could keep his hands from shaking. "That's time," he said. "Time is the only thing I can buy you tonight." The bruised girl swallowed. "We don't have money." Jonah looked at her. "I didn't ask." The rope scar boy's voice came out rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "He's going to bring men." "Yes," Jonah said, "and you're going to hand us over." Jonah set the spoon down. He took a long breath. Then he said, "I'm going to ride you into town at dawn, same as I told him." The room went colder than the snow outside. The smallest boy began to tremble. His sister grabbed his hand so hard it must have hurt, but he didn't pull away. The tall girl's eyes went flat. Not tears, something worse. Acceptance. Jonah held up a hand, stopping the panic before it could turn into noise that broke his promise. "Listen," he said. "I didn't say I was handing you to whoever you ran from." The rope scar boy's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" Jonah looked at each of them, slow, making sure they heard him with more than ears. "I'm saying if you step into town like hunted animals, you'll be treated like hunted animals. If you step into town like people with a story that holds up in daylight, you've got a chance." The bruised girl's voice cracked. "We don't have a story. We have the truth," Jonah nodded. "Then we'll make the truth stand." The tall girl's lips pressed together. "And if it doesn't?" Jonah's gaze didn't move. "Then I'll do what I should have done the first time I saw a bad thing coming and pretended I didn't." The rope scar boy stared at him like he was trying to find the lie. "Why?" he demanded. "Why would you do any of this?" Jonah's eyes flicked just once to the doorframe where pencil marks climbed the wood, years of height measured, then stopped. He didn't speak about it. He just looked away. "Because winter kills faster when you're alone," Jonah said. He ladled stew into bowls and set them on the table. The smell made the smallest girl's eyes go wide. She reached, then hesitated, like eating was something you got punished for. Jonah shoved a spoon toward her. "Eat," he said, not unkind. "You can be scared after." They ate in silence at first, small, careful bites, like they didn't trust the food to stay. Jonah watched them without staring. He clocked everything the way ranchers did, how the rope scar boy positioned himself between the door and the smaller ones, how the bruised girl kept her back to the wall, how the tall girl didn't sit until everyone else had a bowl, how she only ate after the youngest had swallowed 3 bites. He didn't need names to see what roles they'd taken on. Outside, the wind began to stack snow against the windows. When the bowls were half empty, Jonah spoke again. "We're going to do this straight," he said. "You tell me your names, your real ones. You tell me where you came from and what you ran from. No gaps, no fancy, just the shape of it." The rope scar boy's spoon paused. "So you can sell us." Jonah's eyes lifted. "So I don't get you killed by talking wrong in front of the wrong man." The bruised girl swallowed hard. "The wrong man is the one you won't name." Jonah's jaw tightened. "I'll name him when you're ready to say it first." Silence. Then the tall girl set her spoon down, slow. "My name is Lark," she said. Her voice was steady, but it cost her. "Lark Donnelly." Jonah nodded once. "All right, Lark." The rope scar boy hesitated, then muttered, "Cade." "Cade what?" Cade's eyes flicked toward Lark like he needed permission. Lark didn't look at him, just kept her gaze on Jonah. Cade cleared his throat. "Cade Mercer." The bruised girl's voice was softer. June. And the little ones? Jonah asked. The small boy stared down at his bowl like the stew had answers in it. His sister answered for him. That's Toby, she said. He don't talk much. I'm May. Jonah let the names settle into the room like logs set on a fire. 5 runaways, 5 breaths, 5 lives that had ended up in his kitchen while the snow came. He nodded toward Lark. Now tell me what you ran from. Lark's eyes didn't drop. A man who buys people, she said. Cade's knuckles went white around his spoon. June's breath hitched, then steadied. May's hand tightened around Toby's, and Toby finally looked up, eyes too old, face too young. Jonah felt the room tilt, like a storm shifting direction. He didn't ask the man's name yet. He could see it hovering behind their teeth like a nail. Instead, he stood, grabbed a stack of blankets from the chest by the wall, and started handing them out. You sleep tonight, he said. Barn loft's warmer than the back room if the wind stays north, but the house is safer if someone comes. Cade's eyes sharpened. Someone's coming. Jonah met his gaze. Not tonight. Lark's voice was quiet now. You don't know that. Jonah's face went hard. I know how men move when snow starts. They wait for clear ground. Even wolves do. He pointed down the hall. Back room's got 2 beds. June, May, you take them. Toby can sleep on the pallet by the stove if he wants. Cade, barn. You look like you'd rather freeze than be cornered. Cade didn't deny it. And you? Lark asked. Jonah looked at her. I'll be in the chair by the door. Lark's eyes narrowed. Why? Jonah's answer came plain. Because if somebody knocks, I want my face to be the first thing they see. They moved slowly, like they expected the floor to vanish. May guided Toby to the pallet. June carried bowls to the wash basin without being asked. Hands quick like chores were safer than talking. Cade took his blanket and headed for the back, pausing once to glance at Jonah like he couldn't decide if he hated him or needed him. Lark stayed in the kitchen. Jonah watched her in the stove light. You're not sleeping, he said. Lark's chin lifted. Neither are you. Jonah nodded, as if that was fair. Dawn comes early. Lark's eyes stayed on him. You really gonna walk us into that town? Jonah didn't lie. Yes. And you really think you can stop what's waiting there? Jonah's gaze drifted to the window where snow now swarmed the dark like ash. I think, he said slowly, that if I don't try, I won't be able to live in my own skin another winter. Lark stared at him a long moment, then nodded once, small. Not trust, not gratitude. Just the bare agreement to survive one more night. She turned and walked down the hall without another word. Jonah banked the fire, checked the latch twice, then sat in the chair by the door with his rifle across his knees, not pointed, not ready to kill, just present like a warning to the world. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, 5 runaways breathed in his house, and the law had given him one night to decide what kind of man he was going to be when morning came. Snow thickened into a steady curtain before midnight. It didn't fall like feathering. It came sideways, driven hard, rattling the panes and packing itself into every crack of the yard. Jonah sat by the door until his legs went numb, rifle across his knees, listening to the house settle and the wind prowl the eaves. He heard Cade in the barn at least twice, footsteps on the loft boards, then the scrape of the ladder as if he'd climbed down to check the stalls. Jonah didn't call out. He understood the kind of boy who slept with one ear open and a knife tucked where a pillow ought to be. Near the stove, Toby's breathing turned thin and uneven, like he was trying not to take up space even in sleep. May had curled around him, one arm over his ribs, guarding him like a mother dog. June and Lark were down the hall behind a closed door that didn't quite latch. Jonah could see the line of lamplight under it when the fire shifted. At some point he dozed in the chair without meaning to. His head dipped, then snapped up at a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not the creak of rafters. A soft click. Jonah's hand closed around the rifle stock before his eyes fully opened. He held his breath and listened. Another click, slow. Metal against metal, faint, careful. Someone was working the gate latch. Jonah didn't move fast. Fast got you killed. He slid out of the chair in one quiet motion, keeping the rifle low so the barrel wouldn't knock the doorframe. He eased to the window by the door and peeled back the curtain a finger's width. The yard was a swirl of white and dark. The barn sat half erased by snow. The corral fence was a ghost line, but he caught it, lantern glow bobbing low near the front gate, shielded by a coat and two shapes behind it, hunched against the wind. Not lost travelers. Travelers didn't creep. Travelers called out. Jonah drew the curtain shut and turned his head just enough to see May's eyes open wide on the pallet. She hadn't made a sound. She just stared at him, frozen. Jonah put a finger to his lips. Then he pointed toward the hall, a silent order. Stay back. May swallowed and pressed her face into Toby's hair, covering his mouth with her hand like she'd done it before. Jonah padded to the gun rack by the hearth and took down a second rifle, the shorter one, loaded and ready. He set it within reach behind the chair in case he needed it fast. Then he stepped to the door and leaned in, ear near the wood. A voice, low and muffled by the storm. "You sure?" Another voice answered, harsher. "He's got him. I saw the light." Jonah's jaw tightened. They weren't guessing. The latch rattled again. Jonah unhooked the chain, not because he planned to open, but because if they forced it, the chain would tear the frame and make noise that woke everyone. He slid the bolt back with a thumb. Then he opened the door a hand's width and let the night rush in like a slap. The lantern light flared. Two men stood on the porch steps, hats pulled low, scarves up to their eyes. Snow crusted their shoulders and stuck to their mustaches. One held the lantern. The other had a shotgun tucked under his arm, not raised but not hidden either. The lantern man's eyes narrowed when he saw Jonah already awake. "Evenin'." Jonah kept his voice flat. "No, it isn't." Shotgun man shifted his stance like he owned the boards. "We're looking for a girl." Jonah's gaze stayed on the shotgun. "Lots of girls in the territory." Lantern man gave a humorless little snort. "Don't play dumb. We're looking for Lark Donnelly." Behind Jonah, the house seemed to inhale. Lark's name said out loud, here, in his doorway, felt like a match struck in dry hay. Jonah didn't glance back. "Never heard of her." Shotgun man stepped closer, boots scraping. "You got a habit of lying to men in storms?" Jonah opened the door wider. Cold poured in, making the fire hiss. He wanted them to see his face clear. He wanted them to see his eyes and measure what kind of trouble lived behind them. "You got a habit of showing up at a man's house uninvited with a gun and thinking that's manners?" Lantern man's gaze flicked into the room, quick. He saw May on the pallet, stiff as a board. He saw the small lump of Toby. His eyes sharpened, predatory, like a dog catching scent. "We're not here for your little ones," he said. "Just the Donnelly girl. She belongs to—" Jonah's voice cut him off. "Say it." Lantern man's jaw worked. He didn't like being challenged on someone else's authority. "She belongs to Silas Rourke." The name landed heavy. Even if you hadn't seen Rourke, you'd heard him in the way men lowered their voices at saloons, in the way storekeepers smiled too hard, in the way judges suddenly remembered appointments. He was money and hired muscle in papers stamped by men who wanted to keep breathing. May's fingers dug into Toby's blanket. Jonah's face didn't change. "She's not here." Shotgun man's mouth curled. "Crow, don't make this complicated." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "You know me." Lantern man's shoulders rose and fell. "Everybody knows you. Man who don't play along. Man who lost what he cared about and decided the rest of the world ought to pay for his sour soul." Jonah felt the old ache rise behind his ribs like a bruise pressed too hard. He didn't show it. "Get off my porch." Shotgun man's grip tightened on his weapon. "You're going to turn away Rourke's men?" Jonah gave them a slow look, taking in the cheap wool coats, the frost on their lashes, the way their hands shook just a hair from cold and not from certainty. Rourke didn't send his best into a blizzard. He sent men he could afford to lose. "You're not Rourke's men," Jonah said. "You're hired hands. That means you're hungry." Lantern man's eyes flashed. "Careful." Jonah's voice stayed low, steady. "I'm careful. That's why I'm still alive." Shotgun man shifted the barrel up a few inches, still not aimed, but closer. "We can come in and look." Jonah's rifle rose a fraction, just enough to make the point without making the first move. "You set one boot over my threshold, you're leaving a piece of yourself behind." The wind shoved at the porch, making the lantern flame buck. For a second the light flared, and Jonah saw the lantern man's face clear, scar on his cheek, stubble, eyes too mean for a man who slept easy. Lantern man leaned closer, voice dropping. "Sheriff Pike already got a paper," he said. You think you can hide her from Law and from Rourke? You're standing between two jaws, Crow. Jonah didn't blink. Then you better back away before you get bit. Shotgun man spat over the railing. Ain't worth dying over a runaway. Jonah's voice went colder. Then why'd you come? The lantern man's eyes slid past Jonah again, trying to see shapes in the room. Because she's valuable, he said, and the way he said it made Jonah's stomach turn. And because Rourke don't like being told no. Jonah's smile showed nothing. Well, he can add it to his collection. Lantern man's gaze hardened. We'll be back. Jonah nodded once. Bring a coffin. Shotgun man made a sound in his throat, angry, but the lantern man grabbed his sleeve and tugged him down the steps. They didn't turn their backs until they hit the yard. Then they vanished into the snow, lantern glow swallowed like a dying ember. Jonah shut the door and slid the bolt home. He put the chain up and stood there, breathing through his nose until the tremor in his fingers went away. Behind him, May whispered, They know her name. Jonah turned. May's eyes were huge, shining with fear that didn't spill into tears. Toby had woken and was staring at Jonah with a blank, stunned look, like he'd been jerked out of a nightmare into a worse one. Jonah crouched by the pallet. Keep him quiet, he murmured to May. You did good. May's jaw clenched. Are they coming back? Yes, Jonah said, because lies didn't help children like these. Not tonight, maybe, but soon. May swallowed. We gotta run. Jonah's gaze flicked to the hall. Not in this storm. May's face tightened like she wanted to argue, but she looked at Toby and the shaking in his hands, and she didn't. Jonah stood and moved down the hall without waking the whole house. He stopped outside the back room and knocked once, soft. No answer. He pushed the door open. June sat up in bed like she'd been awake already, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes sharp in the dim. Lark was standing beside the far wall with her blanket wrapped around her like armor, a small pistol in her hand that Jonah hadn't seen before. She held it steady, not pointed at him, but ready. Jonah kept his hands visible. They came, he said. Lark's face didn't change, but her eyes tightened. Rourke, Jonah nodded. June's voice was thin. What did they want? Lark answered, flat. Me. Jonah took a slow breath. They know you're here. Lark's jaw clenched. Then your deal with the sheriff won't matter. He'll walk us into town and Rourke's men will be waiting. Jonah didn't disagree. That's why we're not doing what Pike thinks we're doing. June's eyes widened. What does that mean? Jonah stepped inside and closed the door behind him, keeping his voice low. It means dawn is still a line in the sand, he said, but we choose where that line gets drawn. Lark's pistol didn't waver. You said no gaps, no fancy, just truth. Jonah's gaze stayed on her eyes, not the gun. Then tell me the full truth, not just a man who buys people. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you did. Tell me why he wants you back bad enough to send wolves in a blizzard. Lark's throat moved once. She looked at June, then back at Jonah. Because I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear, she said. June's hands tightened on the blanket. Lark didn't look away. Because I took something. Jonah's heart beat once, hard. What? Lark's voice stayed steady, but it scraped going out. A ledger. Silence. Jonah felt the meaning of it click into place like a rifle bolt. A ledger wasn't just numbers, it was names, payments, routes, judges bought, sheriffs leaned on, ranches used as way stations, children turned into currency. June whispered, She didn't mean, I meant, Lark cut in. I didn't do it for money. I did it because if I left it there, I'd be dead anyway. Jonah's eyes narrowed. Where is it? Lark hesitated. The pistol dipped a fraction, then rose again, a reflex. Not in this room, Jonah nodded slowly. You hid it. Lark's voice was brittle. I'm not stupid, June swallowed. She put it somewhere safe. Jonah stared at Lark. Safe is a word men use when they want to pretend they can control fate. Lark's chin lifted. It's safer than carrying it on me. Jonah thought about the men on the porch, thought about Pike with his warrant, thought about the storm and the roads that would clear soon enough for trouble to ride in on. Cade, Jonah said, and turned his head toward the hall. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried. A second later, soft boots in the corridor, then Cade's face appeared in the doorway, snow crusted in his hair like he'd been out. He held a knife, not a rifle. He looked from Jonah to Lark's pistol and didn't flinch. "What?" Jonah said. "Two men came, asked for her by name," said Rourke. Cade's eyes went dark. "Where are they?" "Gone," Jonah said. "For now." Cade's knuckles whitened on the knife. "We should have killed him." June hissed. "Cade?" Cade didn't look at her. "You don't leave wolves alive when they found the den." Jonah held up a hand. "Not now. We have a different problem." Cade's gaze snapped to him. "What?" Jonah nodded toward Lark. "She took a ledger." Cade stared at Lark like he was seeing her for the first time. "You what?" Lark didn't back down. "I took what they used to own people." Cade's mouth opened, then shut. His eyes flicked to Jonah, then back. "Where is it?" Lark's voice went colder. "Not your business." Cade took one step forward. "It is, if it gets us killed." Jonah cut between them. "Enough. We're not tearing each other apart in a back room while Rourke's men sniff the porch." He looked at Lark. "If you have that ledger, it's leverage," he said. "It's the only thing that turns you from prey into a threat." Lark's eyes narrowed. "And you want it." Jonah didn't pretend. "I want to keep you alive, and I want something to put in Pike's hands that makes him choose the right side even if it costs him." June's voice shook. "He won't." Jonah's gaze stayed hard. "He might if the alternative is hanging from a tree when the truth hits the county." Cade's jaw tightened. "Or he sells it back to Rourke for a nicer badge." Jonah looked at Cade. "Then we don't hand it over easy. We make it so if Pike betrays us, he dies with us." June went pale. Lark's eyes sharpened. "What are you saying?" Jonah took a breath, measuring each word. "We ride into town at dawn like I promised," he said. "But not to Pike's office, not first." Cade's eyes narrowed. "Where?" Jonah said. "The Telegraph." June frowned. "The Telegraph office?" Jonah nodded. "We send word past this county, to someone who can't be bought cheap." Cade scoffed. "Who, Jonah? Who's going to care about 5 runaways and 1 angry rancher?" Jonah's gaze went distant for half a heartbeat, like he saw a face he hadn't spoken of in years. Then it hardened again. "The Territorial Marshal," he said, "or the railroad men, or a newspaper in the city that smells blood and profit, somebody bigger than Rourke's pocket." Lark's voice was skeptical. "And you think a message beats a bullet?" Jonah leaned in. "A message makes bullets costly," he said. "Rourke can kill you quiet. He can't kill you loud if a wire carries his name beyond this valley." Cade's knife hand trembled from anger or cold. "And Pike, he'll be waiting at dawn." "He will," Jonah said. "That's why we need him thinking we're doing exactly what he told us." June's brow furrowed. "So we lie to him." Jonah's voice stayed steady. "We survive him." Lark stared at Jonah a long moment. "If I give you the ledger," she said, "you don't get to decide what happens to it alone." Jonah nodded. "Fair," Cade said. "Where is it?" Lark's eyes flicked to June, and June's shoulders slumped like the secret was heavy. "It's in the barn," June admitted, barely a whisper. Cade's gaze snapped to her. "You hid it?" June swallowed. "Lark told me to. She said if they caught her, they'd tear her apart until she talked, but they wouldn't think to search me. I'm nothing to them." Jonah's jaw tightened. "You're not nothing." June's eyes glistened, but she blinked it away fast. "It's wrapped in oilcloth under the grain bin, behind the loose board." Jonah nodded once. "Good. That means those 2 didn't get it tonight." Lark's voice went sharp. "They'll come back with more," Jonah said. "Not if we move first." He turned to Cade. "Go to the barn," he whispered. "Quiet. Bring it in. Don't let anyone see your lantern." Cade didn't hesitate. He vanished down the hall. Jonah looked at June and Lark. "Pack what you can carry," he said. "No trunks, no keepsakes, food, water, warm cloth. May and Toby, too." June's lips parted. "We're leaving?" Jonah shook his head. "Not running," he corrected. "Positioning." Lark's eyes stayed on him. "You're sure about the Telegraph?" Jonah nodded. "I'm sure about making noise." Lark's voice dropped. "And if the wire is cut?" Jonah's face went hard. "Then we cut a different throat." June flinched at that, but she didn't argue. Jonah stepped out, moving fast now, the quiet kind of fast. He went to the kitchen and crouched by the pallet. May was awake, eyes fixed on him like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. "They came," she whispered. Jonah nodded. "They left. But we move at dawn." May's hand tightened on Toby. "Where?" Jonah kept his voice low. Town. May's eyes widened with fresh terror. No, Jonah held her gaze. Listen to me, he said. Town is danger, but it's also people. Eyes, ears, a wire that carries truth farther than horses. If we stay here, we're alone when they come back with more guns. May swallowed hard. Toby can't run. Jonah's voice softened just a notch. Then we don't make him run, we make him ride. Toby stared at Jonah, lips pressed together, and Jonah could see him thinking in the slow way frightened children did, weighing whether adults were promises or traps. Jonah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of hard candy, peppermint, old and wrapped in paper. He set it in Toby's palm. For your mouth, Jonah said quietly. Helps keep you from coughing in the cold. Toby's fingers closed around it like it was gold. Jonah looked back at May. You keep him close, he said. If anyone grabs him, you scream like the devil's got you. Don't be polite. Don't be brave. Be loud. May nodded, jaw clenched. The house shifted with movement as June came out carrying a sack and a bundle of blankets. Lark followed, pistol still tucked in her blanket folds. They moved like people who'd learned to pack fast. Jonah went to the stove and filled a tin with stew, wrapped it in cloth. He took dried jerky, bread, a canteen. He checked the rifle again, then the revolver at his belt. He didn't put on a coat yet. He needed his hearing. Outside, the wind eased for a moment, and in that easing, Jonah heard it. Hoofbeats in the distance, slow and careful on iced ground. Not one horse. Several. Jonah's eyes snapped to the window. In the storm glow, dark shapes moved along the fence line. No lanterns this time. Cade burst in the back door then, snow on his shoulders, breathing hard, oilcloth bundle under his arm. His eyes were wild. Jonah, he hissed, there's men. I hear 'em, Jonah said. Cade shoved the bundle into Jonah's hands. It was heavier than paper ought to be. Jonah didn't unwrap it. He just tucked it inside his coat close to his chest like it was a beating heart. June whispered, How many? Jonah counted the shadows. 4, he said, maybe 5. Lark's face tightened. They came back. Jonah nodded, mind already moving. They're not coming to talk. May pulled Toby up, trying to keep him silent. Toby's eyes were round, candy still clenched in his fist. Cade looked at Jonah, knife gone now, rifle in his hands. We can shoot. Jonah's gaze stayed on the window. If we shoot now, we're in a siege with 5 kids in one house. That's what they want. June's voice shook. Then what do we do? Jonah's mind flicked through the ranch like a map. Barn, he said. We go out the back, use the barn as cover, get to the ravine trail and circle wide. We can reach town before light if we push. Lark's eyes narrowed. In this snow, Jonah looked at her. Better snow than bullets. A knock hit the front door, not gentle, not polite, the kind of knock that assumed obedience. Another knock, harder. A voice carried through the wood, muffled but clear enough. Jonah Crow, open up! The lantern man from before. Cade's jaw clenched. Let me put a hole in him. Jonah shook his head once. Not yet. The voice continued louder. We know she's inside. Open the door and hand her over, and we walk away. You keep playing hero, and we'll burn this place down with everyone in it. May sucked in a breath, sharp. Toby made a small sound, and May clamped a hand over his mouth. June's face went white. Lark's fingers tightened around her pistol. Jonah's voice was low, iron. Back door, he said. Now, quiet, no talking. They moved. June took May's free hand and pulled her, guiding her like she'd done it for herself once. Cade went first, rifle ready. Lark stayed behind Jonah, eyes fixed on the front like she wanted to run at it. Jonah reached the back door and eased it open. Cold punched in. Snow swarmed the threshold. Beyond it, the yard was a blur. But the barn was there, darker than night, a hulking shape waiting. Another knock pounded the front door. Last chance, Crow! Jonah ushered them out one by one. Cade slipped into the storm, hugging the wall. June went next, dragging the sack. May carried Toby half in her arms, his boots dangling, his breath held. Lark moved like a shadow, pistol tucked close. Jonah stepped out last and pulled the door shut behind him without a sound. They crossed the yard in a crouch, using the wind and whiteness as cover. Jonah's boots found the packed path by memory. Snow slapped his face. He tasted iron, not from blood, from cold. Halfway to the barn, A shape detached from the side of the house, another man circling back, smarter than the ones at the door. He saw them. For one heartbeat, the world froze. The man's mouth opened to shout. Jonah didn't think. He lunged, closing the distance fast, slamming his shoulder into the man's chest. They went down hard into the snow, the impact knocking air out of both. Jonah's fist found the man's throat, crushing the sound before it became a warning. The man clawed at Jonah's coat, trying to pull a knife free. Jonah drove his forearm down, pinning the hand, then smashed his head back into the ice-crusted ground. Once, twice. The man's eyes rolled. Jonah hauled him by the collar into the deeper drift beside the shed and shoved snow over him like a blanket. Not dead, Jonah didn't have time to make sure, but quiet. He looked up. Cade had stopped near the barn doors, rifle half raised, eyes locked on Jonah with a question. Shoot? Jonah shook his head hard. Move. They slipped into the barn. The smell hit Jonah first. Hay, manure, cold animal breath. The horses shifted in their stalls, ears pricked, sensing fear. Cade pulled the doors shut until only a crack of white showed. Inside the loft above, the old haystack made a dark slope. Jonah guided them along the aisle toward the far exit that opened to the ravine trail. A sound from outside, boots on the porch, then the front door rattling. They were inside the house now. June's breath came fast, shallow. Lark's eyes burned with fury, not just fear. May held Toby so tight, his face pressed into her shoulder. Jonah reached the far barn door and eased it open a few inches. The ravine lay beyond, a black cut in the land, edged with snow. The trail down was narrow, but it would hide them from the yard if they moved quick and stayed low. Jonah gestured. Cade first, down the ravine to scout. Cade slid through the opening like he'd been born for it. June went next, then May with Toby, then Lark. Jonah followed, pulling the door nearly shut behind him, leaving just enough gap to slip out without a scrape. They started down the ravine. Then, from the barn aisle behind them, a horse screamed, sharp, panicked. Jonah's stomach dropped. That wasn't a normal stall noise. That was a horse reacting to a stranger. Someone else was in the barn. Cade froze midway down the slope, turning his head. June's eyes widened. May clamped Toby tighter. Lark spun back toward the opening, pistol coming up. A shadow filled the crack of the barn door above them, blocking the faint light. A voice drifted down, calm and amused, cutting through the storm like a blade. "Thought you could sneak out the back, Crow?" Jonah's blood went cold. Because he knew that voice. And it wasn't one of the hired hands. It was Sheriff Harlan Pike. Sheriff Harlan Pike stood in the barn doorway like he'd grown there, coat dusted white, hat brim low, a lantern in one hand and his other resting near his gun without touching it. The lantern light cut a thin yellow slice through the snow and down the ravine, catching their faces one by one. Jonah didn't move. Moving first was how men ended up with holes in them. Cade's rifle came up on instinct. Pike didn't flinch, but his eyes sharpened. "Put it down," Pike called, voice steady. "I'm not here to shoot children." Lark's pistol was already up, aimed straight at his chest. Her arm didn't shake. "You followed us," Jonah said. Pike's gaze stayed on Jonah. "I found you." "That's not the same." Pike's jaw tightened. "It is tonight." Below him, in the ravine, June's breath came in fast puffs. May had Toby tucked under her chin like she could keep him invisible. Toby didn't cry. He stared at Pike with the blank terror of a kid who'd seen too many uniforms. Cade's voice came out like gravel. "You brought them." Pike's eyes flicked once toward the house, and in that flick Jonah caught it, something like regret buried deep and pushed down hard. "I didn't bring Rourke's men," Pike said. "They were already sniffing your porch. I came because I heard about it." "Heard," Jonah repeated. "From who?" Pike didn't answer. Jonah's fingers tightened around the strap of his coat where the oilcloth-wrapped ledger pressed against his ribs. He didn't let his hand drift there. He didn't let anyone see he was guarding anything. "Sheriff," Jonah said, keeping his voice low, "you said dawn." Pike's lantern hand rose a fraction, not threatening, just showing the light. "And I said I wasn't tearing children out of a warm house in a storm." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "So you decided to do it in a barn?" Pike's stare hardened. "I decided I wasn't going to wake up tomorrow to 5 bodies in a burned ranch house and pretend I couldn't have stopped it." Cade's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Stopped it? You're the law. You're the reason men like him walk free." Pike's eyes cut to Cade. "You don't know what you're talking about." Cade stepped forward on the slope, boots sliding a little in the snow. "I know you got a warrant, and I know those men at the door knew her name. You think names float on the wind, Sheriff? Or you think somebody in town has been talking?" Pike's face went still. That stillness was an answer. Lark's voice was quiet and lethal. "Did you tell them?" Pike's gaze snapped to her. For a second, he looked like he might lie. Then he didn't. "I didn't tell them you were here," Pike said. "But I did tell someone to keep an eye on Crow's place." June's face twisted. "Why would you—" "Because," Pike snapped, then forced his voice back down. "Because I knew this was coming. I knew if you were on Crow's land, it wouldn't stay secret." Jonah's mouth went dry. "You put eyes on my house." Pike's lantern swung slightly as the wind shoved it. "I put eyes on your house so I'd know when it turned into a slaughter." Cade's finger tightened on the trigger. Jonah saw it, and he lifted one hand behind him without looking. 2 fingers, a signal. "Hold." Cade hesitated, then held. Barely. Jonah's voice stayed even. "What do you want, Pike?" Pike took a step closer to the ravine edge. Snow slid off his boot. He stopped before the lip like he respected gravity more than men. "I want you to come with me," Pike said. "All of you, now. While it's still dark enough, I can keep this from turning into a parade." "Parade," Lark repeated, bitter. Pike's jaw clenched. "Don't twist it." Jonah's eyes stayed on Pike's gun hand. "You come alone?" Pike's gaze didn't shift. "Alone?" "That's a lie," Cade said. Pike's eyes flicked past Jonah into the barn behind him, and Jonah understood. There were no deputies with Pike, but there were men in the yard, men who weren't his, men who'd already breached the house. Pike said, "They're in your kitchen, Crow." June made a small choking sound. May's face went bloodless. Jonah felt heat surge up his spine, anger sharp enough to cut the cold. He kept his voice low. "You let them in." Pike's nostrils flared. "I didn't let them. I rode up as they were forcing the latch. I could have drawn on them right there." "And you didn't," Cade spat. Pike's eyes flashed. "Because there were kids inside. And because Rourke's men aren't the kind you scare off with a badge unless you're ready to kill them." Jonah's gaze narrowed. "So you waited. For what?" Pike's voice turned tight. "For you to run, for them to follow, for me to intercept you away from that house so nobody starts burning things with children in them." Lark's pistol stayed fixed. "That's your plan? Hurt us." Pike's shoulders rose and fell once. "My plan is to get you to my office where I can lock the door and keep you alive long enough for daylight." "And then?" Jonah asked. Pike's mouth worked. "And then we figure out what's true." Cade barked a laugh. "Truth? You mean what Rourke tells you to believe?" Pike's eyes cut to Cade again, colder now. "I'm not on his payroll." Jonah watched Pike carefully. The sheriff was angry, yes, tired. But there was something else too. Fear threaded through him, not for himself. "Then why are you here?" Jonah said, "instead of dragging those men out of my house by their collars?" Pike's jaw flexed. "Because I can't arrest men for existing in a kitchen." Jonah's eyes went hard. "You can arrest men for breaking into a house." Pike's gaze held. "You want me to start a gunfight in your yard with 5 kids in the middle?" Jonah didn't answer, because Pike had a point, and Jonah hated him for it. Cade's voice dropped, dangerous. "They'll take her." Pike's eyes flicked to Lark. "Not if you come with me." Lark's laugh was soft and joyless. "You think your office is a fortress?" Pike's voice turned quiet. "It has walls, it has bars, and it has my gun. And it has your keys," Lark said. Pike's gaze didn't flinch. "Then keep your gun on me until you're sure." Jonah felt June shaking behind him. He felt May trying to keep Toby's breathing silent. He felt the weight of every second passing while men stood in his house like they owned it. "Jonah," Pike said, and Jonah hated hearing his name in that voice, like Pike was trying to make them allies. "If you stay out here, they'll track you. You know that. Snow won't hide footprints for long. They'll find you in that ravine and they'll take what they came for, or they'll kill you for making it hard." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "They already found us." Pike's lantern lifted a fraction. "Because you tried to move as one group through open yard. They were waiting for that." Jonah's voice went flat. "Were you?" Pike held Jonah's gaze. "I was hoping you'd be smarter." Cade's rifle came up again, higher. "That's it. I'm done listening to this. Jonah's hand shot out and clamped Cade's barrel, forcing it down. Cade whipped his head toward Jonah, fury in his eyes. You want to die in a ravine, Jonah hissed, or you want to live long enough to hurt the right man? Cade's jaw worked. He didn't lower the rifle willingly, but he didn't fight Jonah either. Lark's eyes stayed on Pike. If we go with you, she said, Rourke's men will be waiting in town. Pike's voice was tight. They're already in town. They've been there for days. June whispered, Then why take us there? Pike looked at June like he was seeing her properly for the first time, like she wasn't just a shadow with a bruise. Because, he said, town has witnesses. Out here you disappear and nobody asks. Cade scoffed. Witnesses don't stop bullets. Pike's stare hardened. They stop lies, and lies are what keep men like him untouchable. Jonah heard it then. Not a promise, not bravery. Pike was trying to convince himself as much as them. Jonah's mind ran fast, mapping angles and odds. Out here, snow, ravine, cover, but no walls. In town, walls, bars, but also Rourke's reach, and the ledger pressing against Jonah's chest like a second heart. He made a decision, and it tasted like iron. All right, Jonah said. Cade whipped his head around. Jonah held up a hand. We go. Lark's eyes narrowed. You trust him. Jonah didn't look away from Pike. No, he said. I'm using him. Pike's mouth twitched, humorless. Fair, Jonah pointed down the ravine. You go first, he told Pike. You walk ahead where we can see both your hands. Pike hesitated, then nodded. He set the lantern down on the ravine edge so the light washed the slope. Then he stepped down into the cut, boots sliding, careful. He kept his hands away from his gun, out where they could all see them. Jonah motioned. June, May, Toby, then Lark. Cade last. May moved first, half carrying Toby. Toby's boots dragged through snow, leaving a faint trail. June followed, clutching the sack like it was her spine. Lark moved with the pistol still in her grip, blanket wrapped tight, eyes never leaving Pike's back. Cade brought up the rear, rifle angled low but ready. Jonah slipped in behind Lark, close enough to whisper without sound. If I grab your wrist, he murmured, you drop. Lark didn't look at him. If you grab my wrist, she whispered back, I shoot. Jonah didn't smile. Good. They moved down the ravine in single file, boots crunching softly through crusted snow. The walls of the cut rose on either side, dark and close, muffling the wind. That helped. It also meant if someone dropped into the ravine above them, they'd be trapped like rabbits in a trench. Pike kept his pace steady. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew the barrel of Cade's rifle was trained on him. He knew Lark's pistol was ready. He knew Jonah's eyes were on every shadow. They reached the low bend where the ravine widened into the trail that curled toward the back ridge and then down toward town. The storm thinned here, the wind blocked by rock. Snow fell straighter, quieter. The world felt smaller, like it was holding its breath. Pike stopped. Jonah's hand tightened on his rifle. Why stop? Pike lifted a hand slowly. Listen. Jonah listened. At first all he heard was wind and the faint hiss of snow. Then he caught it, another sound beneath it, distant but growing, like cloth tearing. Hoofbeats, more than one. Cade's voice came out like a whisper through teeth. They're on the ridge. Pike's shoulders tensed. They circled. Jonah's gaze shot upward, scanning the dark line of the ravine rim. Snow and rock and shadow, nothing. Then, movement, a shape against the sky. Then another. Riders. They weren't using lanterns. They didn't need to. They knew where the ravine ran. They were pacing it, wolves on a fence line. Pike's voice was tight. Keep moving. Lark's pistol rose a fraction. You said town had witnesses. Pike didn't look back. And I said we had to get there alive. They moved again, faster now, but careful. Speed could break ankles in snow, and a broken ankle out here was a death sentence. The hoofbeats above followed. June stumbled once, caught herself on the ravine wall. Jonah steadied her with one hand without slowing. Her fingers were ice. You okay? Jonah breathed. June nodded, jaw clenched. She didn't speak. Speaking wasted heat. May's boot slipped. Toby made a small, involuntary sound. May pressed her cheek to his head, shushing him without words, moving faster. Cade's eyes kept snapping up, tracking shadows. His rifle was ready to bark. Pike led them toward the narrowest point of the trail where the ravine wall squeezed in. Jonah didn't like it. Too tight, too easy to bottle them. But Pike didn't slow. He seemed to have a plan. They rounded a bend, and Pike stopped at a place where the ravine wall had collapsed years ago, leaving a steep, climbable slope up to the ridge. Pike pointed with his chin. "We go up," he said. Jonah stared. "Up puts us in open." Pike's eyes were hard. "Up puts us on the road. We follow it straight to town. Down keeps us in this cut where they can drop rocks and bullets, and we can't see where they come from." Cade's mouth twisted. "Or they can shoot us from above while we climb." Pike's jaw clenched. "Then climb fast." Jonah's mind flicked through options. Stay in ravine. Trapped. Climb. Exposed, but mobile. Pike was right. Jonah hated that too. "Go," Jonah snapped. "May 1st. Toby, June, Lark, Cade." May climbed with Toby, half dragged, half carried. Jonah watched her hands, small, raw, but strong. June followed, hauling herself up with stubborn desperation. Lark climbed like she'd done it before, pistol tucked into her waistband now so she could use both hands. Cade went last, rifle slung, knife in his teeth for a moment like some feral thing. Pike climbed ahead of them, fast and sure, boots finding holds in the rock. Jonah stayed below for a heartbeat longer, scanning the ravine rim. Hoofbeats were closer now, shadows shifted above. Then he climbed. Cold rock bit his fingers, snow crumbled under his boots. His lungs burned. He hauled himself up and over the lip, rolling onto the ridge in a crouch. The road was there, an old dirt track half buried in snow, running toward town like a pale scar. Beyond it, the dark sweep of prairie and scattered trees, and far off, faint and low, the sleepy glow of town lights. Pike pointed. "Move!" They ran. Not a sprint, boots would slip, but a hard, determined push. Jonah kept the group tight, shoulders hunched, rifles ready. Pike was in front, leading them along the road's curve. Behind them, hoofbeats hit the ridge. A shout carried, muffled by distance, but clear enough. "There!" Cade spun, rifle snapping up. Jonah grabbed Cade's sleeve. "Not yet," he hissed. "Not unless you can drop the leader." Cade's eyes were wild. He tried to find a shot. 2 riders crested the ridge behind them, dark against snow, horses blowing steam. Another 2 followed. 4, maybe 5. Hard to count in the swirling white. They weren't deputies, no badges, no lanterns, just men on horses with guns. One raised his arm, and Jonah saw the flash of metal. Rifle barrel. "Down!" Jonah shouted. They hit the road, bodies flattening into snow. The shot cracked through the night, sharp as lightning. A puff of snow exploded inches from Jonah's head, showering his face with ice. Toby made a small strangled sound. May covered him, her body over his like a shield. Pike rolled onto his side and drew his revolver, firing back twice, quick, controlled. The shots vanished into the storm. Cade fired once and Jonah heard a scream. Not a man, a horse. One of the riders pitched sideways as his mount stumbled, knees buckling in snow. The riders pulled up for a heartbeat, surprised by resistance. Pike barked, "Run!" They scrambled up and ran again, boots slipping, lungs burning, snow whipping into their eyes. Jonah stayed near the back, rifle ready, watching the riders regroup. A second volley cracked. Bullets whined past, invisible until they hit. Sprays of snow, a sharp thud into a fence post. June yelped, stumbling. Jonah caught her arm. "You hit?" She shook her head violently. "No, no, keep moving." The town lights grew closer, but not fast enough. The road was too long, the storm too thick, the riders too steady. Pike's voice cut back toward Jonah. "There's a line shack ahead, old ranger shed." Jonah squinted through snow. Ahead, a dark shape near the road, small, low, half-buried. A shack, barely more than a box. "Get there," Jonah shouted. They surged toward it. May reached it first, shoulder-checking the door. It stuck. She slammed again. It popped open with a squeal. "Inside," Jonah ordered. They piled in, May and Toby, June, Lark, then Cade, then Pike. Jonah went last, turning to fire once down the road, not aiming to kill, just to buy seconds. The shot cracked. The riders hesitated again. Jonah slammed the door and threw his weight against it. Cade shoved a crate over. Pike shoved a table. They braced it fast, rough. Inside, the shack was dark, smelling of old smoke and rot. A single narrow window faced the road. Snow sifted through cracks in the boards. Toby was trembling hard now, silent tears streaking down his face. May pressed his head into her chest, rocking him without sound. June leaned against the wall, panting. Lark stood near the window, pistol up, eyes like flint. Cade crouched with rifle ready, breathing through his teeth. Pike wiped snow from his face with the back of his glove, then looked at Jonah. "You got anything that makes this worth it?" he said quietly. Jonah's eyes narrowed. "What?" Pike's jaw clenched. "You want me to stand between you and Rourke's riders? You better have something that turns this into more than 5 runaways and 1 stubborn rancher." Jonah stared at him. He felt the oilcloth bundle against his chest, heavy, undeniable. Lark's voice was cold. "He's asking about the ledger." Pike's eyes snapped to Lark. "Ledger?" Cade's head whipped toward Jonah. "You told him?" Jonah didn't answer Cade. He watched Pike. Pike stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. "Jonah," he said, "if you have what I think you have, you should have brought it to me first." Jonah's laugh was silent, just air. "So you could lock it up?" Pike's eyes flashed. "So I could send it down the line before Rourke's men cut throats over it." Lark leaned in, pistol still aimed at the window. "And then you sell it," she said. Pike's face hardened. "I'm not him." Jonah's voice was low. "Then prove it." Outside, hoofbeats slowed near the shack. Snow hissed as horses circled. A voice drifted through the boards, calm and almost polite. "Sheriff Pike," it called, "we know you're in there." Pike's shoulders stiffened. His eyes flicked toward the door like he could see through wood. The voice continued. "You don't want to make this your fight. Step out. Hand over the girl. We go home. Nobody gets hurt." Lark's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it hurt. Cade whispered, "They know you're here." Pike's mouth tightened. "They know everything." Jonah's gaze snapped to Pike. "How?" Pike's eyes didn't leave the door. "Because Rourke doesn't need to guess. He has people in every office that matters," June whispered. "Even yours?" Pike's jaw worked. "Not mine." Jonah stared at him. The sheriff was sweating under the cold. Jonah could see it in the shine at his temple. Outside, the voice softened. "Sheriff? Don't be proud. We're not here for you." A second voice, closer, rougher. "We're here for Crow. He wants to play hero. We can make him a martyr." Cade shifted, rifle rising. Jonah held up a hand, stopping him. He leaned toward Pike. "If you're not on his side," Jonah whispered, "then tell me what you were really doing at my barn." Pike's eyes snapped to Jonah. For a beat, he looked like he might refuse. Then the sounds outside changed, boots crunching closer to the shack, men dismounting. Pike swallowed. "I was trying to get you into town before he did," he said, voice tight. "Because once he has you, he doesn't need me anymore." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "And what does that mean for you?" Pike's voice dropped to a near whisper. "It means I end up in a ditch the moment I stop being useful." Silence fell between them, thick. Outside, something scraped against the shack, metal on wood. Someone was testing the boards, looking for weak spots. Lark hissed, "They're going to burn it." Cade muttered, "Let 'em try." Jonah's mind moved fast. The shack was a trap. They could shoot through the cracks, but they were outnumbered. If they stayed, they'd die here. If they ran, they'd be hunted down on open road. Unless... Jonah looked at Pike. "You got a whistle," he said. Pike blinked. "What?" "A sheriff's whistle," Jonah pressed. "You got one." Pike's hand went to his coat pocket, hesitant. "Yes?" Jonah leaned in. "Blow it," he said. "Hard, long, like the town's on fire." Pike stared. "It's miles." "Do it," Jonah snapped. "Right now." Pike hesitated one more heartbeat, then brought a small metal whistle to his lips and blew. The sound tore through the storm, sharp and high, cutting the night like a blade. It echoed off the ridge and vanished, but Jonah knew sound carried strange in snow. It might reach a ranch, a night watch, a drunk on a porch, someone. Outside, the riders cursed. The calm voice called, no longer polite. "Sheriff, stop making noise!" Jonah grabbed the oilcloth bundle from inside his coat and shoved it into Pike's hands. Pike's eyes widened at the weight. "What is this?" Pike breathed. Jonah's voice was iron. "Your reason to stop being afraid." Pike's fingers tightened on it. "Jesus!" Lark's head snapped toward the bundle. Cade's eyes widened. June whispered, "Is that—" Jonah didn't answer. He didn't have time. Outside, a sudden whoosh, something flaring. Light bled through the cracks as a torch or lantern was pressed near the wall. Heat began to lick the wood. They're burning it, May whispered, panic breaking through at last. Jonah's gaze snapped to Pike. Now, he said, you want to prove you're not his dog? You walk out there with that in your hands and you tell them to back off. Pike's face went pale. They'll shoot me. Jonah's eyes were cold, then die doing one clean thing. Pike stared at Jonah like he hated him. Then his eyes flicked to Toby, shaking in May's arms, and something in Pike's face cracked. Fine, Pike rasped. He moved to the door, shoved the crate and table back just enough to crack it open. Cold rushed in. Snow blew. The torchlight outside flared brighter. Pike stepped into the doorway with one hand up and the oilcloth bundle held high in the other like a flag. Enough! Pike shouted into the storm. Back away! The riders drew up, horses restless. Torchlight flickered across their faces, hard men, eyes bright with hunger. The calm voice spoke again, closer now, amused. Sheriff? Pike's voice shook but held. You leave, right now, or I take this straight to the Territorial Marshal. A laugh answered, low and confident. You won't. Pike's jaw clenched. Try me. The man on the nearest horse leaned forward, torch held high. What you got there, Sheriff? Pike swallowed. Something that hangs Rourke. The rider stilled for a heartbeat, then the calm voice chuckled. Sheriff Pike, it said softly. You think you're the only one who knows what that is? Pike's eyes narrowed. Back off. Hand it over, the voice said, still soft, and you walk away breathing. Keep it, and you die right here, and we take it anyway. Pike's hand trembled on the oilcloth. Jonah watched from inside the shack, rifle ready, heart hammering. Lark raised her pistol behind Jonah's shoulder, aiming through the door crack at Pike's back like she didn't trust him not to fold. Cade whispered, He's gonna give it. Jonah didn't whisper back. His eyes were locked on Pike's face. Pike's gaze flicked once over his shoulder, meeting Jonah's for a fraction of a second. In that look, Jonah saw terror, yes, but also a decision forming, hard and bitter. Pike turned back to the riders and lifted his chin. You want it? He shouted. Then come take it. The torchbearer's smile widened. A gunshot cracked from somewhere in the storm, sharp, sudden, and Pike's body jerked. The oilcloth bundle slipped in his fingers as his knees began to fold toward the snow. Jonah burst through the shack door the instant Pike started to fall. Snow slammed his face. The torchlight made the storm look like a swarm of pale insects. Pike hit the ground on one knee first, then both, his hand still trying to keep the oilcloth bundle from sinking into the drift. A dark stain spread across his coat near the ribs, blooming fast. Move! Jonah roared over his shoulder. Cade was already out, rifle up, firing toward the ridgeline where the shot had come from. The crack of the rifle tore the night, and one of the riders jerked in the saddle but didn't drop. The men had cover. They'd planned this. Lark slipped out behind Jonah like smoke, pistol steady. June followed, dragging May and Toby, eyes huge, breath tearing in and out. May kept Toby's head pressed into her shoulder, trying to make him disappear. The riders surged forward, horses snorting, hooves punching holes in the crusted snow. Torchlight bobbed as one man swung down and strode toward Pike with his gloved hands out like he was collecting something that already belonged to him. Jonah reached Pike first. He grabbed the sheriff under the arms and hauled him back toward the shack wall, forcing him behind what little cover there was. Pike's breath came wet and ugly. His eyes were wide, not with surprise, but with the grim knowledge that this was exactly how it always ended for a man who hesitated too long. Stay awake, Jonah snapped. Pike tried to speak. Blood foamed at the corner of his mouth. Ledger, Jonah's hand shot down, fingers closing around the oilcloth bundle before the snow swallowed it. He shoved it into his coat, hard against his chest. Then he pressed his palm to Pike's wound. Hot blood flooded between his fingers, shockingly warm in the cold. Cade fired again. A rider shouted and wheeled his horse back, forcing the others to check their advance. Lark's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and furious. They're circling. Jonah looked up and saw it. Two more shapes moving wide through the storm, trying to flank the shack, trying to cut off the road. They weren't just trying to grab Lark anymore. They were trying to take everything and leave no witnesses. June's voice shook. What do we do? Jonah's mind snapped through the landscape like a whip. Town lights were still distant. The road was open. The ravine was behind them. The shack was already compromised. And Pike was bleeding out in the snow with the one thing that could hang Rourke pressing against Jonah's ribs. Cade! Jonah shouted. Smoke! Cade blinked, then his eyes flicked to the torch near the riders. He understood in a heartbeat. He crouched low, sprinted 2 steps into the open, and fired at the torchbearer's hand. The shot struck wood, not flesh, but it did what Jonah needed. The torch jerked. Flames splashed down into the snow, sputtering, then caught on something oily near the shack wall where the riders had started to smear pitch. The fire licked up fast, hungry. The riders cursed, retreating from the sudden flare, not because they feared flame, because flame meant light, light meant faces, light meant witnesses if anyone was near enough to see. Jonah grabbed Pike's coat and dragged him another yard into deeper shadow, away from the fire's glow. Pike's head lolled, then jerked back up with a ragged inhale. "Pike," Jonah growled, "you got anything on you worth a damn? Flares? Extra rounds? Anything?" Pike's eyes struggled to focus. His hand fumbled at his belt pouch. He pulled out a small tin and shoved it weakly toward Jonah. Jonah snatched it open. Matches, dry, protected. "Good," Jonah said, though it wasn't good at all. It was just something. Another shot cracked. It punched into the shack's boards with a hard thunk. Splinters spat. May screamed, one sharp involuntary sound, and immediately clamped her mouth shut, eyes wild with guilt. Toby finally made noise, a small sob that sounded like it had been stuck in his chest for weeks. May held him tighter, shaking. June crouched beside them, shielding them with her body like she'd decided fear didn't get a vote anymore. Lark fired twice toward the flankers. One of the men dropped to a knee, not hit, just forced down. Her shots were clean and fast. She was shooting to buy time, not to win. Jonah's eyes tracked the riders again. They were repositioning, spreading out into a wider crescent. They weren't rushing now. They knew they had them pinned. They knew cold and distance would do half the killing. The calm voice called through the storm again, still maddeningly polite. "Crow, you always liked the dramatic stage, didn't you? Step away from the girl and the sheriff and we can end this tidy." Jonah looked up, searching for the speaker. He saw a man on a dark horse, sitting straight, unhurried. Even in the storm, the man carried himself like he didn't have to prove anything. That wasn't the lantern thug. That was someone higher up. Jonah's blood went colder than the snow. "Who are you?" Jonah called. The rider chuckled. "I'm the man Rourke sends when he doesn't feel like losing things." Cade spit in the snow. "Come down and say it without a horse under you." The rider didn't take the bait. "Give us the ledger," he called, voice smooth, "and you can keep your lives, maybe even keep your pride." Lark's eyes snapped to Jonah's chest. She knew where it was now. Her face tightened, not with betrayal, calculation. June whispered, barely audible, "They know." Jonah's jaw clenched. "They guessed." "Crow," the rider called, "I know you have it. Sheriff Pike held it up like a lantern. You think that kind of thing stays quiet? You think Rourke doesn't hear every rumor before it's even spoken?" Pike's breath came out in a wet rasp. His eyes fluttered. Jonah slapped his cheek lightly, hard enough to sting. "Stay," Jonah ordered. "Stay with me." Pike's lips moved. No sound. Then a whisper, thin as thread. "Don't trust." Jonah leaned closer. "Don't trust who?" Pike's eyes rolled toward the road, toward the town lights that seemed to mock them. His voice barely formed. "Telegraph." Jonah's stomach tightened. "What about it?" Pike swallowed blood. "Cut." The word hit Jonah like a fist. The telegraph line. Cut. It meant their whole plan, make noise, send word, was already dead in the snow. Lark's face changed when she saw Jonah's reaction. "What?" she hissed. Jonah didn't answer out loud. He didn't have time to explain, and he didn't want the riders hearing it. But he met Lark's eyes and gave her one small shake of the head. No wire. Lark's nostrils flared, fury, hot enough to burn through fear. The rider laughed softly, as if he'd sensed their realization. "You were going to send a message," he called. "That's cute. Out here, messages travel on horses and bullets, same as always." Cade shifted closer to Jonah, voice low. "We can't hold this." Jonah knew it. Their ammo would run out. Their bodies would freeze. The kids would break. His mind raced, searching for the one thing the riders didn't control. Fire still licked along the shack wall, brightening. Not enough to burn the whole structure yet. Snow was soaking the boards, but the pitch they'd smeared was feeding it. Jonah's eyes flicked to the riders' horses. Animals hated fire. They hated unpredictable light. They hated smoke. He glanced at the tin of matches in his hand, then at the oilcloth bundle against his chest, then at the small sack June had carried, food, cloth, and likely a little fat or oil for cooking. "June," Jonah barked without looking away from the riders. June flinched. "Yes?" "Your sack. Anything oily in it." June's hands fumbled. She ripped it open. There's a jar. Lard." Jonah's pulse steadied. "Good." He shoved the matches into June's trembling hands. "Take the lard. Smear it on that dead brush there." He nodded toward a patch of dry scrub half buried along the road edge. "Quick." June stared at him like he'd gone mad. "Why?" "Because I said so," Jonah snapped, then softened just enough to make it land. "Because it's the only way we move." June's jaw clenched. She crawled low through snow, dragging the jar like it weighed 100 pounds. Cade fired once to cover her movement, forcing the nearest rider back behind his horse's shoulder. Lark slid closer to Jonah, pistol still aimed. "You're going to light the road." Jonah didn't look at her. "I'm going to light their horses." Lark's mouth tightened. "You'll burn us too." Jonah's voice stayed flat. "Then stay close and keep moving." Pike's breath hitched. Jonah felt the sheriff sag, heavy in his arms. "Pike!" Jonah growled again. Pike's eyelids fluttered. He forced them open with sheer spite. "Rourke, in town." Jonah's spine went rigid. "In town where?" Pike's mouth worked. "Hotel, upstairs." Lark's head snapped around. "He's here." Pike's eyes drifted toward her. "Not alone." Jonah felt the picture forming. Rourke in town, close enough to smell this fight, confident enough to let his men do the dirty work. And the telegraph cut so nothing could go beyond this valley. The whole county sealed like a coffin. The rider's voice called again, closer now, and this time Jonah heard the smile in it. "Crow, last chance. Toss the ledger out into the snow. Push the girl forward. Walk away. You can still be the kind of man who lives." Jonah stood slowly, keeping Pike supported with one arm, rifle in the other. He made himself visible in the fire's flickering light. "Tell your boss," Jonah shouted. "He picked the wrong winner." The rider sighed, almost disappointed. "So be it." A whistle cut through the storm, sharp, different from Pike's, a signal. The riders moved all at once. Two dismounted and advanced on foot, using their horses as moving shields. Another pushed wide to the left, trying to get a clear angle on Jonah. The calm rider stayed back, directing them like pieces on a board. Cade's rifle barked. He dropped one man's hat clean off, forcing him flat, but didn't hit flesh. Lark fired twice, keeping the left flanker pinned. June scrambled back, jar of lard clutched to her chest, fingers slick. She had smeared the brush, and her hands shook so hard Jonah could see it from 10 yards. Jonah bellowed, "Now!" June struck a match. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the flame caught, tiny and fragile against the storm. June shielded it with her body, pressing it into the greasy brush. The fire took. It didn't roar like summer flame. It hissed, angry, burning low but fierce, spitting sparks as it ate the fat-soaked twigs. Smoke curled and flattened in the wind, drifting straight toward the rider's horses. The first horse screamed and reared, yanking its rider's arm. Another horse sidestepped wildly, hooves slipping. Men cursed, grabbing reins, trying to calm animals that didn't understand bargains. Jonah seized the moment. He grabbed Pike under both arms and hauled him up. "Cade!" Jonah shouted. "You carry him!" Cade's eyes widened. "What? Now!" Cade sprinted in, slung Pike's arm over his shoulder, and dragged the sheriff forward. Pike groaned, head lolling, but stayed barely conscious. Jonah motioned hard. "May! Toby! Move!" May ran, half carrying Toby, her boots slipping, terror making her strong. June ran with them, sack bouncing. Lark stayed near Jonah's shoulder, pistol sweeping, guarding their flank. They surged past the burning brush, using the smoke as a curtain. The rider's calm voice snapped for the first time, anger breaking through. "Get around it! Don't let them reach town!" A shot cracked. It hit the road just ahead of May, kicking up a burst of snow. May screamed again, stumbled, but didn't fall. She kept going. Another shot. June yelped, hands flying to her side. She staggered, eyes wide, then kept moving, refusing to collapse. Jonah reached her, hooked an arm around her waist and pushed her forward. "You're not dying here," he snarled in her ear. June's teeth clenched. "I'm fine." Blood was already soaking through her coat. They ran. Town lights grew larger, closer, still too far. The road dipped, then rose. Their lungs burned. Snow filled their mouths. The wind clawed at their eyes. Behind them, the riders regrouped, forcing their horses past the smoke with brute strength. One man on foot began running along the ditch line, trying to angle ahead. Lark spotted him first. She pivoted, fired once. The man dropped into the ditch. Whether hit or forced down, Jonah didn't know. It bought seconds. Cade grunted under Pike's weight, stumbling, but he didn't let go. Pike's boots dragged. Pike's breath rattled. Jonah's eyes scanned ahead and saw a darker shape against the faint glow. Fences, then buildings, then the first outlying structure, a small barn or shed at the edge of town, half buried in snow. "Get to that!" Jonah shouted. They pushed harder. A bell clanged somewhere in town, faint, distant. Someone had heard a whistle, or gunshots, or just the unnatural noise of horses and men in a storm. Lights flickered in windows like sleepy eyes opening. Witnesses, Jonah thought grimly. Finally. The riders closed again, closer than before. Jonah heard their horses breathing, heard shouted curses. They weren't giving up now. They'd tasted how close they were. The calm rider's voice carried over the wind, colder and louder. "If you don't stop, Crow, we'll kill the children first." May sobbed, choking. Toby began to cry in earnest now, the sound sharp and thin, breaking through every instinct to stay silent. Jonah's vision narrowed. Something inside him snapped into a colder place. He turned while running, raised his rifle, and fired at the calm rider's horse. The shot struck meat. The horse screamed and collapsed in a violent tangle, throwing its rider hard into the snow. The rider rolled, came up on one knee, gun already in his hand, eyes blazing. Cade shouted, "Jonah!" Jonah didn't stop. He kept moving, forcing the group forward, but now the riders were chaotic. Some shocked, some enraged, some suddenly afraid. They weren't used to losing their leader's control. That was the crack Jonah needed. They reached the first building at town's edge, a storage shed with a sagging door. Jonah slammed it open with his shoulder, forcing everyone inside in a rush of bodies and breath. Darkness swallowed them. The shed smelled of grain dust and old rope. Jonah shoved the door shut and threw the latch. Cade collapsed Pike against the wall. Pike slid down, coughing wetly. June sagged to the floor, clutching her side, eyes squeezed shut. May held Toby tight, his face red and streaked with tears. Lark stood near the door crack, pistol aimed outward, breathing steady despite the chaos. Outside, hoofbeats slowed. Riders were hesitant now. Town was right there. Windows had light. Doors might open. Guns might answer. A voice called from the street, not one of the riders. "Who's out there?" Another voice, sleepy and confused. "What in God's name?" Jonah pressed his forehead to the door for a second, listening. This was the thin line between survival and slaughter. Then, Pike grabbed Jonah's sleeve with shocking strength for a dying man. His eyes were wide and frantic. "Crow!" Pike rasped. "Listen." Jonah leaned down. "Talk." Pike's lips trembled. They'll come with my warrant, but the judge is in Rourke's pocket." Jonah's jaw clenched. "I know." Pike shook his head weakly. "No, you don't. The warrant, it's not just for the kids." Jonah froze. "What?" Pike swallowed blood and spit. "It's for you." Jonah's stomach dropped like he'd stepped off a cliff. Lark's head snapped toward them. "What did he say?" Pike's eyes locked on Jonah's, desperate now, like he had one last confession to spit out before the dark took him. "Jonah, the paper says you're harboring fugitives, and," he coughed, a wet ripping sound, "and says you're wanted for the Donnelly girls' kidnapping." Jonah's blood went ice cold. Outside, boots crunched closer to the shed. Someone stopped right at the door. A familiar voice, calm again, now right on the other side of the wood. "Sheriff Pike," it said softly. "Open up. I'm here to help." The voice on the other side of the shed door stayed calm, almost gentle, like it was speaking through a parlor wall instead of a thin plank between life and death. "Sheriff Pike," it repeated. "Open up. I'm here to help." Jonah didn't answer. He pressed his ear to the wood and listened for what mattered more than words: breathing, foot placement, the faint jingle of tack. One man, maybe two. No horses right at the door. That meant they'd left their mounts back to look less like a raid and more like authority. Lark leaned close, her pistol angled at the crack. Her whisper barely moved the air. "Who is that?" Pike's eyes were open but unfocused, his chest rising in shallow, wet pulls. He mouthed something Jonah couldn't catch. Cade shifted, rifle ready, face pale with rage. If that's one of Rourke's, Jonah lifted 2 fingers for silence. He looked at May and Toby huddled in the corner. Toby's crying had stopped, replaced by a hiccuping tremble. May's arms were locked around him so tight her knuckles had gone white. June lay on her side, one hand pressed hard to the bullet wound, lips pressed together to keep the pain from making noise. Outside, the man cleared his throat. "Jonah Crow!" he called, louder now, letting the name roll like it had weight. "I know you're in there too." Jonah's jaw tightened. Pike's warning echoed, "The warrant is for you." The voice continued, "There's no need for more blood. You step out, we settle this proper. You keep hiding in a grain shed, and the whole town's going to think you're exactly what the warrant says you are." Lark's eyes flicked to Jonah, cold. "He has the warrant." Jonah didn't answer. He didn't have to. The fact was already crawling under their skin. Cade muttered, "We can shoot through the door." Jonah's whisper came hard. "And then what? Kill a helper in the street with witnesses in windows? That's the story they'll sell by morning." Pike's fingers clawed weakly at Jonah's sleeve again. Jonah leaned down. Pike's breath smelled of iron. "Name?" Jonah demanded quietly. "Who is it?" Pike's lips trembled, then, barely audible, "Deputy Lyle." Jonah felt a cold pinch behind his eyes. Deputy Lyle Hart, town man. Not Rourke's hired muscle from the ridge, an actual badge. Cade hissed, "If it's a deputy, we're done." Lark's voice was flat. "Not if he's bought." Outside, Deputy Hart spoke again, closer now, like he'd stepped up to the door. "Sheriff Pike? If you're hurt, say so. I'll get the doctor." Jonah looked down at Pike. The sheriff's eyes fluttered, then fixed on Jonah with a last flare of urgency. Pike shook his head, tiny, weak, but clear. "Don't." Jonah breathed out through his nose. The deputy wanted them to talk, wanted them to confirm who was inside, wanted them pinned to the story the warrant already wrote. He made a decision. Jonah raised his voice, rough and controlled. "Sheriff Pike isn't opening anything. He told me to hold." Silence outside. Then the deputy's reply, smoother. "Hold what, Jonah?" Jonah didn't bite. "Hold the door." The deputy chuckled softly. "You always were simple that way." Cade's eyes flared. "He knows you." Jonah kept his gaze on the door crack. "Town knows everybody." The deputy's tone shifted, less friendly. "Jonah, listen. You've got runaways with you. Harboring fugitives is serious. Kidnapping a Donnelly girl is worse." June's eyes squeezed shut tighter. Even through pain, she heard that. Lark's jaw clenched. "He's saying it out loud," Deputy Hart went on. "The judge signed it. The sheriff signed it. I'm just the messenger." Cade's voice came out low and vicious. "And Rourke wrote it." The deputy ignored that. "Open up. Let me take the sheriff. Let me take the kids. We can talk about you after." Jonah's grip tightened on his rifle. The order was wrong on purpose. Separate them. Isolate Jonah. Remove Lark. Then the rest becomes easy. Jonah spoke into the door, steady. "If you're here to help, step back from the door. Put your hands where I can see them through the crack." A pause. Then, "I can't do that. Not with you armed." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Then you're not here to help." The deputy's voice cooled. "Don't do this, Jonah. You're surrounded." "Rourke's men are still out there, and if they decide they don't need law anymore, they'll light this shed and laugh while it burns. I'm the only thing between you and them." Lark's lips parted in a soundless, bitter laugh. He was selling himself as protection from the very wolves he fed. Jonah leaned closer to the crack. "Where's Rourke right now?" Silence. Too long. That silence was an answer. Cade's face went tight. "He's in town." Deputy Hart finally spoke, careful. "Don't drag good men into your mess, Jonah." Jonah's voice went razor calm. "If he's not in it, why are you guarding him with your words?" Another pause. Then the deputy sighed, as if Jonah was a stubborn child. "All right," he said. "Let's do this straight. Sheriff Pike is wounded. You bring him out. I'll take him to the doctor. Then you bring the children. Then you come with me. No shooting, no running." Lark whispered, "He wants Lark first." June's breath hitched. May tightened around Toby. Jonah stared at Pike. The sheriff's eyes were glassy but still there. Pike tried to speak again. Jonah leaned close. Pike's whisper was a thread. Ledger, don't give. Jonah nodded once. Pike's eyelids fluttered, relief or resignation, then his gaze drifted. Jonah straightened and looked around the shed. One small window, one door, thin boards. The town outside waking up, confused. If they stepped out wrong, they'd be caged by the story and shot by the truth. He needed a different lever. He reached inside his coat and pulled the oilcloth bundle halfway out, just enough to feel its edges, not enough for anyone to see. He turned to Lark. How many names are in it? Lark's eyes didn't blink. Enough, Cade snapped. What are you doing? Jonah kept his voice low. I'm making sure we don't die anonymous. He looked at June. Can you walk? June's laugh was a breath. Not far. Jonah's mind moved. Cade, you carry her. May, you keep Toby behind you. Lark, stay close. Lark's eyes narrowed. You're not separating us. Jonah held her gaze. I'm not. I'm moving us. Cade swallowed hard and slid his shoulder under June, lifting her carefully. June bit back a sound, face white. Jonah took Pike's whistle out of the sheriff's coat pocket, cold metal slick with blood. He tucked it into his own. Then he spoke louder, toward the door. Deputy Hart. Yeah, came the reply, immediate. Jonah said, I'm opening the door. You take one step toward us, I shoot you in the knee, and you crawl the rest of your life. A beat, then a forced chuckle. You always did have a way with words. Jonah's eyes stayed hard. Step back. Silence. A shuffle of boots. Then the deputy's voice slightly farther. I'm back. Jonah didn't trust it. He eased the latch up with slow care. Cade and Lark and May all tensed like springs. Toby pressed his face into May's coat, shaking. Jonah pulled the door open a foot. Cold air rushed in. Snow swirled. And there, in the gray streetlight from windows and lanterns, stood Deputy Lyle Hart. Hands visible, palms out, hat brim wet with snow. But he wasn't alone. Two men stood off to the side, not in uniform, coats better cut than a deputy's pay. One leaned casually against a post like he belonged there. The other's eyes never stopped moving. And farther back, half in shadow near the corner of the hotel, Jonah saw a tall figure on the porch above street level, watching. Even at that distance, Jonah could feel the confidence in the way he stood. Silas Rourke didn't need to crowd the door. The town was his room. Deputy Hart's voice went gentle again. See? No one's shooting. Bring the sheriff. Jonah opened the door wider and stepped out alone, rifle low but ready, making himself the first target on purpose. Snow hit his cheeks and melted. The street was lined with half-open doors and faces peering out, sleepy fear turning into hungry attention. Witnesses. Rourke wanted witnesses too, witnesses to Jonah Crow being dragged in as a kidnapper. Jonah raised his voice so the nearest windows could hear. Sheriff Pike was shot outside town by men riding without lanterns, men threatening children. Deputy Hart's smile held, brittle. Let's not start telling stories. Jonah's eyes snapped to him. You want the truth? Here's the truth. Those men came from Silas Rourke. A murmur rippled through the street. Some faces withdrew, some leaned in. Deputy Hart's voice sharpened. Jonah, you're accusing a respected businessman. Jonah cut him off, louder. Respected by who? The judge he owns, the men he hires, the children he buys. Lark's gasp sounded behind Jonah as she stepped into the doorway, pistol visible now. The townsfolk's eyes snapped to her, then to her bruised companions inside. The man leaning on the post, one of Rourke's, smiled like Jonah had finally started entertaining him. Deputy Hart's hand dropped a fraction, closer to his belt. Jonah, put the gun down. You're making this worse. Jonah didn't lower the rifle. He reached inside his coat and pulled out the oilcloth bundle, holding it up, not high like Pike had, not like a flag, but like a weight. This is a ledger, Jonah said, voice carrying. Names, payments, routes, signatures. If you drag us in on that warrant, you're dragging half this town with us. The street went still. Even the wind felt quieter for a second. Deputy Hart's face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. That was all Jonah needed to see. Rourke's figure on the hotel porch shifted slightly, as if leaning forward to get a better look. Jonah couldn't see his eyes, but he could feel them. Deputy Hart's voice went careful, controlled. Jonah, give me that, we'll keep it safe. Jonah laughed once, sharp. Safe like your warrant. The murmurs grew. A door opened wider. A man in long johns stepped onto a porch, squinting. "What's this about a ledger?" Another voice, female, tight. "Is that Sheriff Pike's blood?" Jonah nodded toward the shed. "The sheriff is dying inside there." Deputy Hart's jaw clenched. "Then bring him out. Let the doctor—" Jonah snapped. "Where's the doctor?" Hart hesitated. He's on his way." A lie. Too smooth. Jonah raised his voice again. "If anyone here has a wagon, bring it. If anyone here has a blanket, bring it. The sheriff needs a doctor now." For a second, it looked like the street might obey Jonah instead of the badge. One woman disappeared inside and came back with a quilt. A man with a lantern stepped off his porch, uncertain. Deputy Hart's tone turned warning. "Nobody move. This is law business." The man with the lantern stopped dead. Jonah's eyes flicked to Rourke on the hotel porch. The figure didn't move. Didn't have to. Deputy Hart's voice dropped, just for Jonah, but still loud enough for close ears. "You can't win this in the street. Hand over the ledger. Hand over the girl. I can make the rest less ugly." Jonah's grip tightened on the oilcloth. "And if I don't?" Hart's eyes flicked past Jonah, to the shed door, to the children inside. "Then an accident happens, a stray shot, a fire, and everyone in town will swear you did it." Jonah felt something settle in his chest, heavy and clear. This was the real fight, not bullets on a ridge, stories in a street. He turned his head slightly, calling without looking back. "Cade." Cade's voice came from the doorway, strained under June's weight. "Yeah," Jonah said. "If I whistle, you run the kids down the alley behind the feed store. Don't look back." Lark snapped. "No." Jonah didn't turn. "It's not a question." Deputy Hart's eyes narrowed. "You plan on running again?" Jonah looked at Hart. "I plan on living long enough to bury your warrant." Rourke's men shifted. One stepped forward a half pace, hand inside his coat. The woman with the quilt froze, quilt clutched to her chest. The lantern man backed up. Deputy Hart spoke, louder now, official. "Jonah Crow, by order of the county court, you are under arrest for kidnapping Lark Donnelly and harboring fugitives. Put down the rifle and come forward." Jonah didn't move. The street held its breath. From the hotel porch, a new voice drifted down, deep, smooth, not loud, but it didn't need to be. It slid into the silence like oil. "Jonah Crow," Silas Rourke called, and the way he said Jonah's name sounded almost fond. "You've made a spectacle." Jonah's eyes lifted to the porch. He finally met the shape straight on. "Come down here," Jonah called back. "Say it in front of your town." Rourke chuckled. "My town doesn't need me in the snow. It needs you in irons." Jonah raised the ledger a little higher. "Then explain why your deputy wants this so bad." Deputy Hart's face tightened like Jonah had slapped him. Rourke's voice stayed amused. "Because you don't understand what you're holding. Paper doesn't make you powerful. It makes you dead." Jonah's pulse hammered. He could feel the moment tightening, like a rope pulled to the last notch. He looked at the faces in windows, fearful, curious, owned. He looked at Hart, badge in front, chain behind. He looked at Rourke, lawless king standing above the street like it was a stage. Jonah lifted the whistle to his lips. Hart's eyes widened a fraction. "Don't!" Jonah blew. The shriek cut through the town like a knife, sharper than any bell, high and urgent. Heads snapped, doors swung wider, a dog started barking. Somewhere a man shouted, "What's happening?" And at the same instant, Jonah hurled the oilcloth bundle, not toward Hart, not toward Rourke, but straight into the street, right at the feet of the nearest townsfolk, so everyone could see it land and bounce in the snow. "Witness it!" Jonah roared. "If I die tonight, you all saw what he wanted hidden?" For half a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Deputy Hart lunged, not for Jonah, for the ledger. And the man with the lantern, the one who'd stepped off his porch, moved too, instinctively, reflexively, bending down like he couldn't help himself, hands reaching toward that oilcloth bundle before the deputy could grab it. Hart's hand flashed to his gun. Jonah's rifle snapped up. A gunshot cracked in the street, deafening in the open air, and the lantern man's head snapped back as he folded into the snow, the quilt woman screaming, the ledger rolling once more, slick and dark against white, and Jonah saw Hart's smoking barrel aimed not at a criminal, but at a witness, and everything in the town broke loose at once as Rourke's voice boomed from the porch, furious now. Take them! The scream from the quilt woman ripped through the street and seemed to wake every soul in town at once. Doors flew wider. Faces that had been peeking now poured out onto porches, some with lanterns, some with rifles, most with nothing but bare hands and fear. The lantern man lay in the snow on his back, eyes open and blank, a dark hole just above his cheekbone, blood already freezing at the edges. His lantern had rolled away, flame guttering, throwing wild light across the oilcloth bundle lying a few feet from his outstretched fingers. Deputy Hart stood over the body with his pistol still leveled, smoke curling from the barrel. For a split second, he looked surprised by what he'd done, like he hadn't expected a witness to have a spine. Then, Rourke's voice boomed from the hotel porch. No pretense left. Take them! Everything moved. Two of Rourke's men surged from the side street, rifles up. Another stepped off the porch rail with a short-barreled shotgun, aiming toward the shed. And the riders who'd trailed them in from the ridge began filtering into town's edge, horses stamping, men shouting, the storm swallowing the sound and spitting it back broken. Jonah didn't think. Thinking was slower than survival. He fired once, clean and loud, into the air above Hart's head. The shot cracked like a whip and froze half the crowd in place, not from fear of Jonah, from the realization that this wasn't a drunk argument or a late-night burglary. This was law, money, and blood colliding in the main street. "Back!" Jonah roared. "Get inside!" Some obeyed instantly, yanking doors shut. Others stayed, rooted, eyes locked on the dead man in the snow and the deputy who'd killed him. Cade shoved June tighter against the shed wall, his shoulder under her ribs, keeping her upright. June's face was gray, sweat and blood mixing under her coat. May had Toby pressed against her chest, his small hands clamped around her collar, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Lark stepped out of the shed doorway fully now, pistol raised, eyes like flint. Townlight caught her uneven haircut, the bruise on her cheekbone, the rawness around her mouth. She didn't look like property. She looked like proof. Deputy Hart's voice turned sharp and official again, the badge trying to cover the murder. "Jonah Crow, drop your weapon. You just threatened an officer of the law." Jonah pointed his rifle at Hart's chest, steady. "You just shot a man for bending down." Hart's jaw clenched. "He was interfering with an arrest." Jonah's voice rose. "He was reaching for a bundle you didn't want seen. That's not law. That's panic." Hart's eyes flicked to the oilcloth in the snow. It had shifted slightly in the wind, as if the town itself was pushing it into view. Every set of eyes in the street kept drifting there like it was a magnet. Rourke's men knew it too. One of them started forward, boots crunching, trying to scoop it up and vanish. Jonah's rifle followed him. "Don't." The man stopped, hands spreading in mock innocence, but his grin stayed. "That paper won't save you, Crow." Jonah didn't answer him. He watched Hart, watched the angles. If Hart reached it, the story became sealed again. If someone from the town reached it, the story splintered beyond control. A man stepped off a porch to Jonah's left, a thick-shouldered ranch hand with a winter beard, eyes narrowed. He held a lantern in one hand and a pitchfork in the other, like he'd been pulled from sleep and didn't know what weapon belonged in his grip. He stared at the dead lantern man in the snow, then at Hart, then at Jonah. "Deputy," he called, voice shaking, "why'd you shoot Eli Pruitt?" Hart's face tightened. "Go inside." "Eli ain't no outlaw," the ranch hand insisted, voice rising. "He fixes wheels. He ain't never—" "Inside!" Hart barked. The ranch hand didn't move. More people were stepping out now. 2 women in shawls, an older man with a rifle, a boy holding a lantern too big for his hands. The town was waking into a shape it didn't recognize. Jonah saw the moment the crowd might tip, might choose eyes over fear if someone gave them a spine. He reached into his coat and pulled out the tin of matches Pike had given him. He held it up, not like a threat, but like a reminder. "You all saw him shoot Eli," Jonah called to the porches. "You all heard Rourke order it," Hart snapped. "That's not—" Jonah cut him off. "Sheriff Pike is bleeding in my shed because men riding without badges shot him outside town." That made heads turn. Murmurs surged. "Sheriff? Pike? Shot?" Hart's eyes flashed. "The sheriff is under my care now." Jonah's voice went colder. "Like Eli." A woman's voice called from a doorway, trembling with anger. "Where is Sheriff Pike?" Hart's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Rourke's voice floated down again, smooth, dangerous. "People of Balar," he called, as if greeting them at a church social. "Go back to your homes. This is a legal matter. A kidnapper is being taken in." Jonah's gaze snapped up to the hotel porch. "Come down," he shouted. "Show your face to the people you own." Rourke chuckled softly. "I don't need to stand in the street, Jonah. The street will stand for me." He was right. Jonah could see it in the way some men on porches hesitated, eyes darting, calculating. In the way a few doors shut fast the moment Rourke spoke, like his voice carried a mortgage. Hart took one step toward the oilcloth bundle. Jonah's rifle moved with him. "Don't." Hart's eyes were hard now. "You're finished, Jonah. There's a warrant with your name on it. Kidnapping, harboring, assaulting officers. You can die in the snow or die on a rope." Jonah's stomach clenched, but his voice didn't waver. "Read it." Hart blinked. "What?" Jonah raised his voice. "Read the warrant. Out loud, right here." Hart's face tightened. He didn't want to, because the words weren't law. They were a story crafted for the crowd. Jonah pointed the rifle a fraction lower, toward Hart's hands. "Read it, deputy. Let this town hear exactly what you're arresting me for." Hart's eyes flicked to Rourke above, and Jonah saw the leash go taut. Hart swallowed. Then, from inside the shed, Pike coughed, a wet, ripping sound that made the nearest porches flinch. The sheriff's voice followed, thin but alive. "Lyle." Hart's head snapped toward the shed. Pike coughed again, and the sound carried in the cold like a dying animal. "Lyle Hart. You damn fool." A murmur rolled through the town. People leaned, trying to see through the shed cracks. Someone whispered, "That's Pike." Hart's face went pale with anger. "Sheriff, you're delirious." Pike's voice came again, sharper, fueled by spite. "I'm shot because you tipped them," Hart snapped. "Shut up." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "He says you tipped them." Hart's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might break. "He's bleeding out. He doesn't know what he's saying." Pike rasped, louder, forcing the words into the street. "You told Rourke. I was coming. You told him where Crow lived. That hit the town like a thrown rock." People didn't trust Jonah Crow, but they trusted Sheriff Pike enough to feel their own stomachs drop. A man on a porch barked, "Deputy, is that true?" Hart spun his head. "Go inside." The ranch hand with the pitchfork stepped forward again, shaking now, not with fear, with rage. "You shot Eli and now you're yelling at us like we're dogs." Rourke's voice from above turned cold. "Lyle, end this." Hart's eyes flicked up, then back to Jonah. His hand hovered near his gun again. "Jonah, last warning." Jonah could feel the street splitting into two worlds, the owned world, and the world that still remembered right from wrong. If he didn't force the split wider now, it would close back up and crush them. He made another decision. He lowered his rifle, not in surrender, but to free one hand, and stepped toward the oilcloth bundle. Lark hissed from behind him, "Jonah!" Jonah didn't look back. He reached down, grabbed the ledger, and in one motion, he ripped the oilcloth open. Paper flashed in lamplight, neat columns, names, dates, amounts, notes in tight handwriting. It looked boring. That was the danger. Evil that looked like bookkeeping. Jonah held the top page up and turned in a slow circle so every porch could see ink, could see the weight of it. "This is what he's been hiding," Jonah shouted. "This is what Eli died reaching for." Hart lunged. Jonah stepped back fast, bringing the ledger up higher, out of reach. Hart's hand shot to Jonah's coat, grabbing fabric. Jonah slammed the rifle butt into Hart's wrist. Hart cursed, grip breaking. Cade moved, rifle snapping up, covering Hart's chest. "Touch him again," Cade growled, "and you're dead." Hart froze, eyes blazing. Rourke's men started forward, 2, then 3, trying to swarm, using the chaos as cover. Lark fired once. The shot cracked and punched into the ground inches from one man's boot. "Stop!" The man halted, lifting his hands, grin gone. Another man started to raise his shotgun. Cade fired, clean and brutal, shattering the lantern hanging on a post beside the man's head. Glass exploded. The street went darker. The message was clear. The town gasped. A woman screamed. A door slammed. In the dim, Jonah could hear a different sound now. More boots, more men, not Rourke's. Town men, drawn by the whistle and the shot and the scream, grabbing whatever weapons were closest. Witnesses becoming participants. Jonah seized it. He pointed to the ledger page. "You see these names?" he shouted. "You want to know why your taxes go up while Rourke's wagons roll through? Why the judge signs papers without looking? Because half this town is written right here." That did it. Several faces went slack, afraid of recognition. Others went stiff, angry at the idea they'd been fooled. An older man stepped onto a porch, rifle held low, voice shaking with fury. "My son disappeared last spring," he called. "A boy, 15. Sheriff said he ran off." Lark's head snapped toward the voice, eyes widening. Cade's breath caught. Jonah looked at the old man. "What's his name?" The man swallowed. "Ethan Mercer." Cade went rigid like he'd been struck. The rope scar boy's face went white. His jaw clenched so hard his cheek muscles jumped. The old man stared at Cade now, confused. Then realization hit like a punch. "Cade?" Cade's lips parted, but no sound came out. The storm and the town and the gunman all vanished from his eyes for a second. He was just a boy again, looking at the last person he expected to see alive. Rourke's voice snapped from above, suddenly urgent, no longer amused. "Lyle, now!" Hart's eyes flashed. He reached for his gun. Jonah saw it and moved first, slamming into Hart's chest, knocking him sideways into the snow. Hart hit hard, pistol skittering away. Jonah turned to kick it. A shotgun roared from the side. Wood exploded from the shed wall behind Jonah's head. Splinters tore his cheek. The blast's thunder rolled through the street and the town screamed again. May shrieked inside the shed. Toby wailed. Cade spun and fired at the shotgun man. The man ducked behind a barrel, cursing. The street erupted into pure chaos. Shouts, boots, gunfire cracking, horses screaming as someone yanked reins too hard. Townmen yelled at each other. Rourke's men shouted orders. Deputy Hart rolled in the snow, scrambling for his pistol. Jonah clutched the ledger tighter, papers flapping in the wind like trapped birds. Lark grabbed Jonah's sleeve, yanking him back toward the shed. "In!" Jonah stumbled, then regained footing, eyes darting. Cade was halfway between the shed and the street, rifle up, caught in the open. June was still inside, bleeding. Pike was still dying. May and Toby were trapped behind a door that wouldn't hold forever. Jonah's whistle was in his pocket. He could blow again, but the street was already awake. Awake didn't mean brave. Rourke's voice, now furious, rang from the hotel porch like a judge's sentence. "Burn that shed. Burn it now." Jonah's blood went ice. He turned his head and saw a man with a torch breaking from the side alley, running toward the shed wall where pitch had already been smeared earlier. The flame bobbed in his hand, hungry. "No!" Jonah roared. Cade fired, too late. The torchman was already at the boards. The torch hit the shed wall and stuck, flame licking upward fast, catching the pitch like it had been waiting. Fire crawled along the wood, orange and vicious, lighting the street with a mad glow. May screamed inside, high and raw. Toby's wail turned into choking sobs. June tried to move, couldn't. Pike coughed, wet and helpless. Jonah's mind snapped into a single brutal line. Get them out or watch them die. He charged the shed door, and Deputy Hart, bleeding from the mouth, surged up from the snow and grabbed Jonah's coat with both hands, hauling him back with desperate strength, eyes wild. "You don't get to be a hero," Hart snarled, spit and blood flying. Jonah slammed an elbow into Hart's jaw. Hart didn't let go. He was stronger than Jonah expected, fueled by fear of what Rourke would do if Jonah got away with the ledger. The fire climbed faster. Lark fired at Hart, but Jonah's body was too close. She couldn't take the shot. Cade shouted something Jonah couldn't hear over the roar of flame and the town's screams. Jonah clawed at Hart's hands, trying to break free, the ledger papers crumpling in his fist, ink smearing under his glove. Hart's face twisted into a grin that didn't belong on a man in the snow. "You're done," he rasped. Jonah's fingers found Hart's badge. He ripped it off in one violent yank and drove the sharp metal edge straight into Hart's throat. Hart's grin vanished. His eyes went wide. His hands flew up, gurgling sounds spilling out. Jonah shoved him away and Hart staggered backward into the snow, clutching his neck, collapsing hard. Jonah turned back toward the shed. The door burst outward in a rush of smoke and heat, and May stumbled out first with Toby in her arms, hair singed at the ends, eyes wild, coughing so hard she nearly dropped him. Behind her, Cade surged out carrying June, her arms limp, blood soaking his sleeve. Lark shoved out next, dragging Pike by the coat collar with strength that came from somewhere deep and ugly. Pike's face was gray, eyes half open, mouth working. Jonah lunged forward to grab May. and a bullet struck the ledger in Jonah's hand with a hard, sickening thud, ripping paper into confetti, ink and fragments exploding into the firelit air as another shot cracked immediately after, aimed not at Jonah's body, but at the only thing that could ruin Rourke, and Jonah felt the remaining pages tear and flutter away into the flames while Rourke's voice roared from the porch. "Let it burn!" Firelight turned the main street into a flickering tunnel of orange and black. The shed wall crackled, pitch-popping like gunshots, and the air filled with ash and torn paper. Pieces of the ledger, names, numbers, proof, spun upward and vanished into flame. Jonah stood for one frozen heartbeat with shredded pages in his fist, feeling the bullet's impact still buzzing in his bones. Rourke hadn't aimed for his heart. He'd aimed for the only thing that could touch him. "Move," Jonah bellowed. May stumbled backward with Toby in her arms, coughing hard, eyes watering, hair singed. Toby's face was streaked with soot and tears, his small hands clenched around May's collar like he'd fused to her. Cade staggered out with June slung against him, her body limp and heavy, blood soaking his sleeve and dripping into the snow. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked locked, eyes blazing with a kind of fury that didn't have words. Lark had Pike by the coat collar, dragging him through the snow like a sack of grain. Pike's boots scraped, his head lolled. He made a wet sound in his throat, trying to pull air through ruined lungs. Jonah's eyes snapped up to the hotel porch. Silas Rourke stood above them, calm in the firelight, not shouting now, smiling. A man watching his own story being cleaned up in real time. Around him, shadowed men shifted, weapons ready, faces half hidden by brim and scarf. He didn't need to get his hands dirty. He only needed to decide who lived. Jonah looked at the street. The dead wheel fixer, Eli Pruitt, lay in the snow where he'd fallen, eyes open to the storm. Deputy Hart was on his knees a few yards away, hands at his throat, making a gurgling sound that was fading fast. Townfolk had scattered, some dragging children inside, some clutching rifles without knowing who to point them at. A few stood frozen on porches, staring at the burning shed like the fire was a sign from God. And Rourke's men were closing again, using the confusion like cover. Jonah's brain went cold and clean. The ledger was gone. The plan was gone. The telegraph was cut. If they stayed in the open, they'd be cut down and the town would call it justice by morning. He saw the only thing Rourke couldn't fully control in that instant. The crowd's fear had cracked into anger. Not enough, not yet. But it was there. Jonah ripped what remained of the oilcloth wrap into strips with his bare hands, fast and savage. He shoved one strip into his pocket. He crumpled the last intact page, half burned, ink smeared, into his palm. A name was still visible near the top, a payment line, enough to make a man sweat if the right eyes saw it. "Cade!" Jonah shouted. Cade's head snapped wild. "Get them to the livery!" Jonah barked. "Back lane, behind the feed store. Now!" Cade's face tightened. "And you?" Jonah didn't answer. He pointed hard. "Now!" Cade moved. He hauled June with brutal care, stepping off the street into the shadow of a building. May followed, Toby clinging. Lark half-dragged, half-carried Pike, teeth clenched as she fought panic and smoke. Jonah fell in behind them for 2 steps, then stopped. Lark sensed it and spun, pistol up. "Jonah!" Jonah looked at her. The fire made her eyes look like dark glass. "Go!" he said. "You're not staying," she snapped. Jonah's voice went low. "If I go with you, they follow. If I don't, they look at me." Lark's pistol shook once with rage. "You're not a decoy." Jonah's mouth tightened. "Tonight I am." He pushed the half-burned page into Lark's free hand. "Keep this dry. Don't show it unless you have to." Lark stared at it, then at him. "This isn't enough." "It's all we've got left that's real," Jonah said. "Go." May's sobbing cough turned into a strangled plea. "Please." Jonah didn't look at her. If he looked, he'd follow them. "Go," he said again, harder. Cade tugged May's sleeve. May stumbled after him, Toby wailing softly. Lark held Jonah's gaze one last moment, then turned, dragging Pike into the alley's mouth. Jonah watched them vanish into shadow. Then he turned back to the street. Deputy Hart collapsed fully into the snow with a soft, final slump. No one rushed to him, not even Rourke's men. Hart had been useful until the second he wasn't. Rourke's voice floated down, smooth and bored. "Crow, still standing. You always did like applause." Jonah lifted his rifle and aimed at the porch rail, not at Rourke's body, at the wood. He fired once. The shot splintered the rail. People screamed again. Rourke didn't flinch, but his men shifted, weapons coming up, forced to react. Jonah shouted to the porches, loud enough to shake windows. "You see how he stands up there? You see who he's with? You think a businessman travels with gunmen in a storm?" A man's voice yelled back, panicked. "Jonah, stop!" Another shouted. "Get inside!" Jonah took a step into the street, putting himself fully in the firelight, making sure every face could mark him. Rourke's smile thinned. "You're trying to turn my town into a mob," Jonah's voice carried, hard. "Your town just watched your deputy shoot a wheel fixer for bending down. Your town just watched you order a shed burned with children inside." Rourke's tone stayed even. "I ordered nothing. You're delirious. The sheriff was delirious. The only facts are the warrant and your gun." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Then come down and read the warrant yourself." Rourke chuckled. "I don't read trash." Jonah felt the distance between them like a chain stretched tight. He couldn't reach Rourke with bullets. Rourke had too many bodies between them. He needed to reach Rourke with something else. He raised his voice, sharp and specific, aiming it like a blade. "Tell them about Ethan Mercer." The street stilled a fraction. The old man on the porch, Ethan's father, stared into the firelight like he might faint. Rourke's smile didn't move, but his eyes, Jonah could feel them, hardened. Jonah went on, louder, forcing the name into the air. 15 years old. Rope burns on his wrists. You want to say he ran off again?" A low murmur rose. Someone whispered, "Mercer boy." Rourke's voice stayed smooth. "I have no idea what you're talking about. You're grieving. You're unstable. That's why the court signed a warrant for you." Jonah's jaw clenched. A door opened near the feed store. A man stepped out, one of the town's night watch, rifle in hand, eyes wide. He stared at the burning shed, at Hart's body, at Jonah in the street. "What the hell happened?" Rourke's voice snapped, sharper. "Go back inside." The night watch didn't move. His eyes flicked to the hotel porch, recognition dawning. He swallowed. Jonah seized it. "Ask him," Jonah shouted, pointing his rifle up toward Rourke. "Ask why he's here at midnight in a storm with armed men." Rourke's patience cracked. "Crow," he said, voice turning cold. "You're done entertaining yourself." He nodded, a tiny motion. One of his men lifted a rifle and aimed at Jonah's chest. Jonah didn't run. He raised his rifle too, aiming at the lantern mounted on the hotel's porch post. He fired. The lantern exploded in glass and flame. The porch dropped into sudden darkness. Rourke's outline vanished. His men cursed, stumbling, adjusting. Jonah turned and sprinted, not down the main street, into the side alley behind the feed store, where the shadows were deeper and the snow was less trampled. Gunshots cracked behind him, snapping into wood, kicking snow, but in the darkness, their aim was guesswork. Jonah ran hard, boots slipping, lungs burning smoke and cold. He heard a horse scream. He heard men shouting orders. He heard the town's panic turning into something more dangerous. Questions. He hit the alley mouth and cut left, hugging the wall, moving by memory through the back of town. He knew these alleys. He'd hauled feed through them. He'd fixed fence wire behind these buildings when nobody watched. Ahead, a dim lantern glow, the livery stable. He reached the back door and pounded once, coded, fast, then twice. The door cracked open. A man's face appeared, livery owner, eyes wild. "Jonah?" Jonah shoved inside without asking. "Where are they?" The man's gaze flicked deeper. "Back stall." Jonah pushed past him, and there they were. May crouched on straw with Toby pressed against her. June slumped against Cade, barely conscious, face gray. Pike lay on a blanket, chest barely moving, eyes half open. Lark stood over all of them with the pistol steady, the half-burned page clenched in her other hand like it was the last rope over a cliff. Cade looked up, jaw clenched. "You stayed too long." Jonah's eyes flicked to the stable doors. "They're coming." Lark's voice was ice. "The ledger's gone." Jonah nodded once. "Most of it," June whispered, barely audible. "Then, we're dead." Jonah crouched beside Pike and pressed 2 fingers to his neck, a weak pulse still there. He looked up at the livery owner. "You got a wagon, you got a fast team." The man swallowed. "Jonah, if Rourke finds out," Jonah's gaze went hard. "He already did. Choose what kind of man you want to be when morning comes." The livery owner's throat worked. He looked at Toby's soot-streaked face, looked at Pike bleeding out, looked at the bruise on Lark's cheek. Something in him shifted. He nodded once, sharp. "Back gate," he said. "I can hitch in 2 minutes." Jonah stood. "You don't have 2. Outside, hoofbeats thundered closer, heavy and fast, men shouting. The stable's front doors rattled as someone slammed a fist against them. A voice boomed, "Open up! By order of the court!" Cade's eyes went feral. "They brought the warrant." Jonah's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "They brought a noose." The pounding hit again, harder. Wood groaned. May's breath hitched. Toby started to cry again, small and terrified. Jonah looked at Lark. "Back gate," he said. "You take May and Toby. Cade takes June. I take Pike." Lark's eyes narrowed. "And you?" Jonah's voice stayed flat. "I'm leaving with you." Cade barked a laugh with no humor. "On what road?" "The Telegraph's cut. The judge is bought. Rourke's in town." Jonah's gaze locked on Cade. "Then we stopped playing defense." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the strip of oilcloth he'd saved, wrapped around something small. He unrolled it carefully. A metal key, not a house key, a ring key with a stamped tag. Cade's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" Jonah's voice dropped. "Pike's jail key." Lark's face changed, sharp and immediate. "You stole it." Jonah didn't blink. "Borrowed it." Outside, the stable doors groaned again as men started to shoulder them. The livery owner's voice shook. "They'll break through!" Jonah held up the key. "Rourke thinks the ledger burning ends this," he said, voice low and deadly. "It doesn't, because there's another place he can't afford attention." Cade's brow furrowed. "Where?" Jonah's eyes lifted, locking onto the only idea left that made Rourke bleed. "The jail," Jonah said, "and the man Rourke keeps locked inside it." The pounding on the stable doors hit again, harder, wood groaning like it was about to give. Dust sifted from the beam above the entrance. Horses in the front stalls snorted and stomped, sensing the violence coming. Jonah didn't wait for the next order. He grabbed Pike under the shoulders and hauled him up. The sheriff was dead weight and pain, eyes half open, breath rattling, but he stayed alive out of pure spite. Cade shifted June higher on his shoulder. June's head lolled, lips gray, one hand still pressed to her side like she could hold herself together by force. May tightened her grip on Toby. Toby's face was pressed into her coat, small fists clenched, trembling. Lark stood in the middle of the stall aisle like a blade planted in dirt, pistol up, eyes fixed on Jonah. "You said there's a man in the jail." Jonah nodded once. "Rourke keeps his real problems locked where nobody listens." Cade's jaw flexed. "Who?" Jonah's eyes flicked to Pike, then back. "A printer." Lark blinked. "What?" "The town's old newspaper pressman," Jonah said. "Name's Amos Klein. Used to print county notices, election slop, whatever the judge wanted. Then he got hold of something he shouldn't have. Names, payments, missing boys. Started asking questions out loud." Cade's expression darkened. "And they locked him up." Jonah's voice went colder. "They called it drunken assault. He's been in that cell 3 weeks. No trial, no visitors, just silence." Outside, the stable doors shuddered. A voice barked through the cracks, official and loud. "Open up! This is the law!" The livery owner, Pete, stood by the back stalls with a harness in his hands, fingers shaking. "Jonah, they're gonna—" "Back gate," Jonah snapped. "Now, hitch the fastest team you've got." Pete swallowed, eyes darting toward the front doors. Another crash. Wood splintered. Pete's face tightened. He nodded once like he'd just stepped off a cliff. "2 bays," he said. "They'll pull." He moved. Jonah adjusted Pike's weight and turned to Cade. "You remember where the jail sits?" Cade's eyes narrowed. "Across from the church." Jonah nodded. "Back wall faces the alley behind the butcher. 1 window, 1 door, no light." Lark's voice came sharp. "You're planning to break into a jail in the middle of town." Jonah met her eyes. "No, I'm planning to open it." Lark glanced down at Pike. "With a dying sheriff's key." Jonah's mouth tightened. If Pike's badge meant anything, he'd rather die with his keys used right than live with them used wrong. Pike's eyelids fluttered. His mouth worked. A whisper scraped out. "Amos." Jonah's gaze snapped to him. "You know him." Pike's throat bobbed, pain tearing through him. "He printed my first election." Jonah leaned close. "Is he alive?" Pike's eyes rolled, then focused hard for a second. He nodded, barely. Another crash at the front. A plank snapped. Cold air surged in. Lark's pistol lifted toward the entrance. "They're in!" Jonah's voice went iron. "Then we're out." Pete yanked open the back gate into the alley. Snow blew in, carrying the stink of smoke from the burned shed and the sharper stink of panic. He'd already dragged a small wagon out, 2 wheels, light frame. The 2 bay horses stamped, harness half set, ears pinned. "Help me!" Pete hissed. Jonah shoved Pike against the stall wall for 1 heartbeat and lunged to throw the harness over the nearest bay's back, hands fast despite shaking. Cade used his free hand to cinch the strap while still holding June. Lark tightened the breast collar with brutal efficiency, eyes always flicking back toward the front of the stable. May stood in the gate holding Toby, frozen. Jonah pointed at her. "Get in the wagon!" May stumbled forward, lifted Toby in first, then climbed in after him, curling around him instantly like a shield. The front doors exploded inward. Men poured into the stable, 3, then more, boots crunching straw, rifles up. They weren't deputies. Not one of them wore a badge. They wore Rourke's confidence. A man shouted, "There!" Lark fired first, 1 shot, clean. It struck the lantern hanging near the entrance, shattering glass and throwing the stable into darkness, broken only by moonlight through slats and the flicker of firelight outside. Chaos. A gunshot cracked back. Splinters jumped from a stall post inches from Jonah's shoulder. Pete screamed and ducked behind the wagon frame. Jonah hauled Pike up again, staggering him toward the wagon. "Cade!" he shouted. "Move!" Cade dragged June toward the rear, boots slipping on packed straw. June made a thin sound, then bit it off. Another shot. A horse screamed and kicked, metal clanging. Lark backed toward the gate, pistol barking once more. A man cursed, dropping to a knee. Whether hit or forced down, Jonah couldn't tell. "Go!" Jonah roared. Pete slapped the reins hard. The bays surged forward, wagon jolting as it hit the alley, snow spraying. Jonah shoved Pike into the wagon's back corner like dead cargo. Pike groaned, eyes rolling. Cade half threw June onto the straw beside May. May caught June's head with 1 hand while keeping Toby tucked with the other, doing 2 jobs at once without thinking. Lark jumped up last, landing light, pistol still up. The wagon lurched into the alley's dark. Behind them, a shout rose from the stable. "They're getting away!" Hoofbeats hit snow. Someone was mounting up. Pete drove the bays hard, cutting through the back lanes where buildings formed tight corridors of shadow. Jonah lay low in the wagon bed, rifle ready, eyes scanning every corner. They passed behind the butcher's shop, the stink of salt and blood mixing with smoke. They passed the feed store where the alley narrowed, then opened into a lane that ran behind the church. The church stood dark and hulking, its steeple swallowed by snow. Beyond it, the jail was a squat stone box with 1 narrow window at the back, iron bars glinting faint. Pete slowed instinctively. Jonah grabbed his shoulder. "Don't stop. Roll past once, slow, like you belong." Pete swallowed and did it. They rolled by the jail's back wall. Jonah counted. 1 window, frosted glass, no lantern inside. The back door was set into stone with a heavy iron latch. Cade leaned in, voice low. "How do we get him out without the whole town seeing?" Jonah's eyes stayed on the dark window. "We don't use the front." Lark's voice was tight. "The back door will scream." Jonah nodded. "Then we make the scream sound like something else." He looked at Pete. "Wagon wheel. Can you make it break loud?" Pete blinked. "What?" Jonah's gaze sharpened. "Can you make it sound like an accident, like a drunk tipped a load?" Pete's face tightened. He understood. He nodded once, grim. Jonah looked at May. "Cover Toby's ears, no matter what happens." May nodded, trembling, and pressed Toby's head into her lap, palms over his ears. Toby whimpered, but didn't fight. Jonah slid off the wagon as it rolled into the alley behind the jail, boots sinking into snow. Cade followed, rifle in hand. Lark slipped down beside Jonah, pistol up, eyes scanning. Pike tried to sit up in the wagon, face contorted. "No," he rasped, weak. Jonah looked up at him. "Stay alive," he said. "That's your job." Pike's eyes fluttered with rage and pain. "Lyle," he whispered. "Rourke." Jonah nodded once. "We know." Pete drove the wagon a few yards farther down the lane, then yanked the reins hard and let 1 wheel hit the curb of frozen dirt at an angle. Wood cracked with a sharp report. The wagon tilted. A sack of feed tumbled off the side with a loud thud. Pete Pete shouted, loud and panicked, "Damn it, damn wheel!" The sound carried. It was perfect, messy, ordinary, believable. Jonah moved instantly to the jail's back door. He pulled the key out, Pike's ring key, and fitted into the lock by feel. It resisted, stiff with frost. Cade whispered, "Hurry." Jonah twisted harder. Metal groaned. The key turned. The lock clicked. Jonah eased the door open a fraction. Cold air spilled from the dark inside like breath from a cave. He slipped in, rifle low. Lark followed, pistol up. Cade came last, shutting the door behind them until it rested, not latched, ready to move fast. Inside the jail, darkness smelled of piss, old sweat, and despair. Jonah could barely see the bars, but he knew the layout. 2 cells, a narrow desk, a back hallway that led to the sheriff's office. A voice from deeper inside, hoarse and startled. "Who's there?" Jonah stepped closer to the cell bars. "Amos." A pause, then a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "If you're a ghost, you picked a foul place to haunt." Jonah's eyes adjusted. In the far cell, a man sat up from a cot, thin, beard scraggly, eyes bright despite exhaustion. "That you, Crow?" Amos Klein rasped. Jonah exhaled. "Yeah." Amos stared past him at Lark's silhouette and Cade's rifle. "You bringing trouble into my hole." Jonah's voice was low and urgent. "We're bringing you out." Amos's laugh cracked. "Out? Sheriff Pike wouldn't even—" "Pike's dying," Jonah cut in. "Rourke's in town. Deputy Hart shot a man in the street. They tried to burn kids alive." Amos's face changed, the cynicism burning off in an instant. "They finally did it in daylight." Jonah moved to the keys hanging on the wall inside the jail. Spare ring, old and worn. He grabbed them, found the cell key, shoved it into the lock. Amos leaned forward, eyes locked on Jonah's hands. "You got proof," he whispered. Jonah's jaw clenched. "Most of it burned." Amos's eyes flashed. "Most is enough if you got the right names." Lark stepped closer. "We have a page." Amos's gaze snapped to her. "One page can hang a town if it's the right page." Jonah twisted. The lock clacked. The cell door swung open with a faint squeal. Amos stood slowly, legs stiff, then stepped out. He was thinner than Jonah expected, starved more by silence than food. "You're the Donnelly girl," Amos said, eyes narrowing. "I saw you once, on Rourke's porch. You were carrying water like a servant." Lark's face hardened. "I stole his ledger." Amos's mouth twitched. "Good." Cade's voice was tight. "Can we talk later?" Outside, muffled through stone, Jonah heard a distant shout. The town was stirring toward the noise. Someone would notice the jail door soon. Someone would check. Jonah grabbed Amos by the arm. "Move!" They slipped toward the back door, but then Amos stopped dead, eyes widening at something behind Jonah. Jonah turned. On the desk near the front office, a folded sheet of paper lay under a paperweight. The corner was stamped, "Court Seal." Jonah's stomach tightened. "The warrant." Lark stepped closer, breathing shallow. "Take it." Jonah crossed to the desk, snatched it, unfolded it in the dim. His name. Clear as a bullet. Jonah Crow, charged with kidnapping Lark Donnelly, harboring fugitives, resisting lawful arrest. Below, the judge's signature. Jonah's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Amos leaned in, eyes narrowing. "That judge signed it," he whispered, "which means—" "It's already decided," Cade said. Jonah folded the paper and stuffed it inside his coat. "No," he said, voice flat. "It means they're scared enough to write the lie down." A new sound outside, closer now. Boots, several. Someone yelling, "Back here!" Lark's pistol snapped up. "They're coming!" Jonah grabbed Amos again. "Back door!" They reached for it, and from the hallway leading to the sheriff's office, a lantern suddenly flared to life, throwing light across the floor. A figure stood there, blocking the exit. Not a deputy. Not one of Rourke's hired riders. Judge Weller himself, robe thrown over his nightclothes, hair disheveled, lantern held high, eyes wide, face tight with terror and fury. He stared at Jonah, stared at Lark, stared at Amos free of his cell. Then his gaze landed on the keyring in Jonah's hand, and his voice came out shaking and loud enough to carry through stone. "What have you done?" the judge hissed. "You've just signed your own hanging." And outside the jail door, men's voices rose closer, excited. "They're in there." Judge Weller's lantern shook in his hand, throwing his own shadow huge against the jail wall. He looked like a man who'd spent years pretending ink was stronger than steel and had just realized steel was in the room. Jonah didn't lift his rifle. He didn't need to. The judge wasn't here to fight. He was here to stop a door from opening. "What have you done?" Weller hissed again, voice cracking. "You've just signed your own hanging." Outside the jail's front, boots pounded the steps, men shouting over each other. Someone tried the handle. The heavy front door rattled, then held. "They're in there," a voice barked. Jonah's eyes stayed on Weller. "Move!" Weller's mouth twisted. "You think you can threaten a judge?" Amos Klein stepped forward out of the darkness, thinner than he should have been, eyes bright with a hate that had had weeks to sharpen. "He doesn't have to," Amos rasped. "You've been threatening yourself for months." Weller flinched at Amos's voice like it was a whip. "You," he spat. "You were supposed to stay quiet." Amos laughed once, ugly. "Quiet like those boys you call runaways." Cade's head snapped at that word. Lark's pistol rose a fraction. Weller's gaze flicked to Lark and hardened. "The Donnelly girl," he said, as if naming a piece of property. "Return her now and I can—" Jonah cut him off, cold. "You can't do anything that isn't approved by the man on the hotel porch." Weller's face reddened, then drained pale. He was trapped between pride and fear always won with men like him. From outside, the front door rattled again. A fist pounded hard. "Open up! Deputy Hart's order!" Jonah's jaw tightened. Hart was dead, but his name still worked like a key in this town. Weller heard it too. His eyes darted to the office hall behind him, then back at Jonah. "You don't understand," he whispered, voice dropping. "If you walk out that back door, he'll kill you. If you stay, the town will hang you. Either way, this ends." Jonah stepped closer, boots soft on the dirty floor, rifle low. "It ends when you decide to stop lying out loud." Weller's laugh was thin and panicked. "You think truth saves you? Truth is what gets people buried. Truth is why Klein is a skeleton." Amos's eyes burned. "Truth is why you're shaking." Weller's hand tightened on the lantern handle. "I'm shaking because I'm surrounded by criminals." Lark's voice turned sharp, cutting. "Say it again. Call me a criminal." Weller's gaze flicked to her pistol, and he swallowed. "Put that down." "No," Lark said. "You're going to look at me and tell me why you signed a warrant saying Jonah Crow kidnapped me." Weller's lips pressed tight. Jonah reached inside his coat and pulled the folded warrant out. He held it up, letting the lantern light catch the seal. "Read it," he said quietly, "since you like paper." Weller's eyes flicked over the text. His throat bobbed. It's lawful." Jonah's voice stayed even. "Read it out loud." Outside, the pounding turned into shoulder hits. The front door groaned. The iron hinges complained. Cade whispered, harsh, "We don't have time." Jonah didn't look away from Weller. "Read it." Weller's face twisted. "I won't." Amos leaned in close to the bars, voice low and venomous. "Then I will. And when I do, I'll add the parts you didn't write down, like the boys who vanish, like the payments you collect." Weller's eyes flashed. "You have nothing." Amos's smile was sharp. "I have a page." Lark's hand tightened around the half-burned sheet in her fist. She raised it slightly. Weller saw it, and his face changed in a way that made Jonah's stomach tighten. Recognition again. Fear again. Weller's voice dropped to a whisper, pleading and furious at once. "Give me that," he said to Lark. "You don't know what it is." Lark's eyes went flat. "I know enough." Jonah saw the judge's calculations start. How to get that page without making noise, how to buy time until Rourke's men broke in. He stepped forward and put the warrant right under the lantern light. "Read it," Jonah repeated, softer now, almost gentle. "Or I'll tell them out there you signed it under Rourke's hand." Weller flinched. "You can't prove that." Jonah's voice went colder. "You think proof matters to a crowd that just saw a deputy shoot a wheel fixer? You think your robe protects you when people smell the rot?" Weller's eyes widened. He heard it then. The town outside wasn't just shouting orders. Some voices were questioning, arguing. "Why's the jail locked? Where's the sheriff?" Hart said, "Hart's dead." The street was splitting again, and Weller could feel which side would win if the right spark hit. Weller's hand shook harder. "Fine," he rasped. "Fine." He lifted the warrant, eyes scanning as if the words could burn him. Then he started reading, voice cracking. "Jonah Crow, charged with kidnapping Lark Donnelly, harboring fugitives, resisting Lawful. A boot hit the front door so hard the whole building shuddered. Weller jumped, lantern swinging. "Stop!" he shouted toward the front. "Stop that!" The pounding paused, then continued, angrier now. Jonah leaned toward Weller, voice low. "You want it to stop? Open the front and tell them the truth." Weller's eyes snapped to Jonah. "If I do that, he kills me." Jonah didn't blink. "Then die doing one clean thing." Weller's face twisted. He looked like he might vomit. Amos stepped closer, voice rough but steady. "Judge," he said, "you already chose death. You just didn't know the date." Weller's gaze darted to the back door behind him, the only way out. He tightened his grip on the lantern as if it could guide him through the storm alone. Then Lark spoke, calm and lethal. "If you run, I shoot you." Weller froze. "You won't," he breathed, looking at her like she was still a servant. Lark's pistol didn't move. "Try me." Weller's eyes flicked to Jonah. "You brought her here," he whispered. "You brought a weapon into a courthouse." "It's a jail," Jonah corrected, "and you turned it into a tomb." The front door gave a louder groan. Wood splitting. They were going to get in. Jonah's mind snapped forward. They couldn't hold this building. They needed the crowd, not the walls. He grabbed the judge's sleeve, hard, and jerked him toward the back door. "You're coming with us," Jonah said. Weller jerked back like he'd been burned. "No, no, I'm not." Jonah shoved him against the wall, rifle barrel not quite touching, close enough. "Listen," Jonah hissed, "if Rourke's men find you in here with us, they'll kill you anyway and say you died trying to stop criminals. If you walk out with us, you might live long enough to be useful." Weller's eyes were wide. "Useful how?" Jonah's voice dropped. "By opening your mouth." Outside, someone shouted, "Burn it!" And the word made Jonah's blood go cold. Rourke's solution to every problem. Cade snapped, "Jonah!" Jonah moved. He hauled the judge upright. Cade and Amos flanked them. Lark kept her pistol on Weller's ribs. Jonah shoved the back door open into the alley. Snow slapped them in the face. The alley was dim, lit by scattered lanterns and the glow of fire from the shed burning across town. The broken wagon with the snapped wheel sat crooked. Pete stood by the reins, eyes wild, horses stamping and snorting. May stared at Jonah from the wagon bed. Toby pressed into her. June slumped against the straw, Pike barely breathing. May's eyes widened at the sight of the judge being dragged like a thief. "Get in," Jonah snapped at Weller. Weller recoiled. "I can't." Lark pressed the pistol into his side. "You can." Weller stumbled up into the wagon, robe flapping, lantern still in his hand like a ridiculous crown. Amos climbed in after him, gripping the side rail. Cade stayed on the ground a heartbeat longer, rifle sweeping the alley mouth. From the front of the jail, a roar went up, wood cracking, voices surging as the door finally gave. "They're out back!" someone shouted. Jonah yanked himself up onto the wagon beside Pete. "Drive," he said. Pete cracked the reins. The bays surged forward, wheels crunching snow. They shot down the alley toward the back lane that led out of town. Behind them, boots pounded into the alley. Lantern light bobbed. Shouts rose. A gunshot cracked and punched into the wagon's side rail, splintering wood near Amos's knee. Amos flinched, but didn't duck. He stared back into the chasing light like he was daring the town to see him alive. Cade jumped up onto the wagon's rear, rifle still up, and fired once into the air above the pursuers. The shot echoed off buildings, and for a second, the chase hesitated. Because now the sound wasn't contained. Now every house could hear it. Weller clutched the side rail, face white. "Where are you taking me?" he gasped. Jonah's voice was iron, carrying over hoofbeats. "To the one place in this county Rourke can't control without showing his hand." Amos barked a laugh. "You mean the church?" Jonah nodded once. "The church." Weller stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "That won't protect you. God doesn't stop bullets." Jonah's eyes stayed on the dark road ahead. "No," he said, "but a full congregation with lanterns and eyes might." They cut out of the alley into the back road behind the churchyard. Headstones rose like teeth in the snow. The church itself loomed ahead, black and quiet, but Jonah saw a faint light in an upper window, someone inside woken by the chaos. Behind them, the pursuing lanterns reappeared at the end of the lane, closer now. Riders, too, hoofbeats joining the chase faster than men on foot, Rourke's men. Cade cursed under his breath. Lark's pistol came up, aimed toward the rear. Jonah leaned to Pete. "Get us to the church steps, hard." Pete's jaw clenched. He drove the bays into a full pull, wagon bouncing, June groaning faintly with the jolt. May whispered to Toby, frantic, trying to keep him from screaming. They hit the churchyard gate and crashed through, wood snapping, iron squealing. The wagon lurched up the slope toward the church steps. Jonah saw the front doors, heavy oak barred from inside. Good. He shouted toward the church window, voice raw. "Pastor, open up!" A silhouette appeared at the upper window, lantern held high. The face was indistinct, but Jonah saw the collar, pastor's white strip. The pastor's voice called down, terrified. "What is this? Open!" Jonah roared, "or they'll burn you with us!" The pastor vanished from the window. The wagon slammed to a stop at the steps. Jonah jumped down, boots hitting snow, and grabbed Pike's shoulders. Cade and Lark leapt down too. Amos climbed out, dragging Weller by the sleeve, forcing him into the open. Behind them, riders crested the churchyard gate, lanterns bobbing. A man shouted, "There!" Rourke's voice wasn't here, but his will was. The riders spread, forming a crescent again, guns lifting. Jonah shoved Pike's weight against Cade. "Get him inside!" Cade grunted, hauling Pike up the steps. The church doors cracked open from within. Warm light spilled out. The pastor stood there with a lantern, face ashen, hands shaking. "Help!" Jonah snapped. The pastor's eyes flicked to Toby, to June bleeding, to Pike half dead, and then to Judge Weller standing in the snow like a nightmare wearing a robe. "Judge?" the pastor breathed. Weller's lips trembled. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Jonah seized his shoulder and shoved him toward the open doors. "Tell him," Jonah hissed. "Tell him who sent men to burn children." Weller's eyes filled with terror. "He'll kill me." "Not if everyone hears you," Jonah said. The riders advanced. One raised a torch. Jonah stepped out onto the church steps, placing his body between the doors and the guns. He lifted his rifle, aimed not at the riders, but at the torch. He fired. The torch exploded into sparks and ash, falling into the snow with a hiss. The rider cursed and reined back. The pastor gasped. More doors in town began to open at the sound, people climbing the hill, lanterns in hand, drawn by the only place that still felt like neutral ground. Rourke's men hesitated. Killing in the street was one thing. Killing on church steps in front of a forming crowd was another. It wasn't morality that stopped them. It was the cost. Jonah turned his head slightly toward Weller, who stood frozen in the doorway, robe flapping in the wind, lantern shaking. "Now," Jonah said, voice low enough only Weller could hear. Weller swallowed, eyes darting across the churchyard, at guns, at snow, at lanterns rising as townsfolk approached. Then, with a sound like his spine breaking, he raised his chin and shouted into the night, "Silas Rourke ordered the warrant. Silas Rourke ordered Sheriff Pike watched, and Deputy Hart shot Eli Pruitt on Rourke's command." The words rang out over the churchyard like a bell. The riders froze. The approaching townsfolk stopped dead, lanterns held high, faces shocked. And from the far end of the churchyard, a new voice answered, deep, furious, unmistakable, cutting through the storm as Silas Rourke himself stepped into view between two armed men, eyes locked on the judge like a man looking at a traitor. "You should have stayed quiet," Rourke said. Rourke stepped into the churchyard like the storm belonged to him. He didn't hurry. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Two armed men flanked him half a pace behind, coats dark, faces blank. Lantern light from the crowd painted his cheekbones and made his eyes look deeper than they should. "You should have stayed quiet," he said again, gaze fixed on Judge Weller. Not anger, ownership. Weller stood in the doorway, lantern shaking, robe flapping in the wind. His mouth opened, then closed. His throat bobbed like he was trying to swallow his own heart. Jonah stayed on the steps, rifle leveled toward the yard, body squared. Behind him, the church was chaos. Pastor shouting orders, June moaning faintly as Cade laid her on a pew, May rocking Toby and whispering nonsense prayers into his hair, Pike coughing wetly on the floor near the altar. Lark stood just inside the doorway with her pistol up, eyes locked on Rourke like she'd carved his face into her mind. Rourke's gaze slid from Weller to Jonah, amused. Crow, still playing wall. Jonah didn't lower the rifle. "You came all the way down from your porch." Rourke smiled faintly. "Your judge embarrassed me." Weller flinched at the possessive word. The crowd in the yard thickened. Men in coats, women with shawls, lanterns held high, faces pinched with fear and curiosity. A few had rifles, held low, unsure who deserved the barrel. They stared at Rourke like they weren't used to seeing him this close at night, in snow, outside the protection of office hours. The pastor stepped onto the threshold beside Weller, voice shaking. "Mr. Rourke, this is church ground." Rourke looked at him like he'd noticed a fly. "Then pray harder." A murmur rolled through the crowd. A man near the fence spat into the snow. Another pulled his lantern higher to see Rourke's face clearly. Jonah spoke, loud enough for the front rows. "Sheriff Pike was shot outside town. Eli Pruitt was shot in the street. The deputy's dead. The shed was burned. If this is all lawful, why is Rourke here with guns?" Rourke's smile didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. "Because you're violent," he said calmly, turning his voice toward the crowd as if he was giving testimony. "Because you've been unstable since your wife died. Because you took in vagrants, and now you've dragged them into town like trophies. You killed a deputy. You broke into a jail. You forced a judge to speak lies out of fear." Weller's lantern shook harder. Rourke cut him off without looking. "Quiet." Weller shut his mouth like it had been stitched. Jonah's jaw tightened. Rourke was doing it again, turning blood into a story, turning witnesses into furniture. Lark stepped forward one pace, into the doorway light. "He didn't kidnap me," she said, voice steady and sharp. "I came to him. I ran. Because you own men who buy kids." Rourke's gaze finally slid to her. The faint smile returned, colder. "Lark Donnelly," he said like a sigh. "You were always dramatic." Lark's pistol didn't move. "I stole your ledger." Rourke's eyes flicked, almost imperceptible, toward her hand, empty of paper now. The smile thinned. "And you burned it," Jonah said. "You shot it out of my hand." Rourke spread his hand slightly as if offended by the accusation. "I shot at a man pointing a rifle at citizens." A man in the crowd barked, "Eli wasn't no citizen?" Another voice trembling with rage. "Why'd Deputy Hart shoot him then?" Rourke didn't answer them. He never answered down. He answered only sideways, through someone else. He nodded once toward the armed men beside him. One stepped forward and raised a folded paper. "By order of the county court," the man called, voice practiced, "Jonah Crow is to be taken into custody for kidnapping Lark Donnelly, harboring fugitives, resisting lawful arrest, and the murder of Deputy Lyle Hart." A wave of murmurs surged. Murder, warrant, kidnapping. Jonah felt the crowd wobble. Words had weight out here. Warrant was a spell some men still believed in. The pastor's eyes went wide. "Murder?" Lark hissed. "He was choking Jonah. Rourke lifted one finger. The man with the paper continued, louder. "Any person aiding Jonah Crow will be considered complicit." That landed like a threat aimed at every lantern in the yard. Jonah raised his voice before fear could settle. "Sheriff Pike is inside. Ask him who shot him." A murmur. People leaned. Someone shouted, "Let us see Pike." Rourke's eyes flicked toward the church door, irritation tightening his jaw for the first time. "Pike," he said softly, "was always weak." Inside, Pike made a sound, half cough, half laugh. Cade's head snapped toward him. Lark's eyes widened. Pike's voice scraped out, louder than it should have been for a dying man. "Rourke." The crowd went still. Pike coughed wetly, then forced words out with pure hate. "He sent them." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "Sheriff," he called, voice still calm, "you're delirious. You were shot by bandits on the ridge." Pike wheezed a laugh. "Bandits, with your money." A gasp rippled through the yard. Someone whispered, "Pike said it." Rourke's calm cracked into cold anger. "Enough." He took one step forward. Jonah's rifle tracked him. "Don't." Rourke stopped, eyes fixed on Jonah's barrel. Not fear, calculation, how to turn this. He lifted his voice toward the crowd, smooth again. "Listen to yourselves. You're taking the word of a dying man and a runaway girl over the court, over your judge, over your deputy." A man's voice rose from the back. "Deputy's dead." Rourke nodded once, as if that proved his point. "Because Jonah Crow killed him." Jonah felt the story pulling. If it held, the town would swallow him to protect itself. He looked at Weller. The judge was trembling, eyes darting, trapped between Rourke and the crowd. Jonah had dragged him into light. Now the judge had to either stand or fold. Jonah stepped back half a pace into the doorway so only Weller could hear him. "Say it again," Jonah murmured. "Clear, what you said. Loud." Weller's lips trembled. "I'll die." Jonah's voice stayed low. "You're already dead. Decide if you want it quick or true." Weller's eyes flicked to Rourke. Rourke's stare was a knife. Then Weller's gaze dropped to the snow where Eli Pruitt's death lived in everyone's memory now. Weller swallowed hard, and something in him broke clean. He stepped out onto the threshold, lantern high, voice shaking but loud. "I signed the warrant under threat," he shouted. "Silas Rourke ordered it. He controls the court through debt and violence. Deputy Hart was acting under his direction." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rourke's face went still. The amusement vanished completely. For the first time, the town saw what lived underneath his polite skin. He looked at Weller and spoke softly, almost kindly. "Judge, you don't want to do this." Weller's chin trembled. "I already did." Rourke nodded once, as if acknowledging an inconvenience. Then he turned his head slightly toward the men flanking him. "Take him," Rourke said. The armed men moved. The crowd reacted, lanterns bobbing, people shouting, stepping back, stepping forward, confusion turning into panic. Jonah moved first. He lunged off the steps into the yard, slamming his shoulder into the nearest gunman before the man could grab Weller. The gunman grunted, staggered, rifle swinging. Jonah drove his elbow into the man's jaw and ripped the rifle free. Lark fired, one shot, clean and sharp. It struck the second gunman in the thigh. The man dropped with a scream, hands clawing at the wound. The yard erupted. People screamed. Someone yelled, "Gun!" A lantern fell and rolled, flame-licking snow. Rourke stepped back, eyes blazing now. No more softness. "Shoot him," he snapped. Two riders at the fence line raised rifles. Jonah grabbed Weller by the sleeve and hauled him backward toward the church steps. "Inside!" Weller stumbled, terrified, robe snagging on snow. A shot cracked. It hit the church doorframe, splintering wood inches from Lark's head. Lark ducked and fired back, forcing the shooter down behind a horse. Cade burst from the doorway, rifle up, face feral. He fired once and dropped a man's hat into the snow, making the man dive for cover. The pastor screamed for people to get inside. Some ran, others froze. The old man who'd called out Ethan Mercer's name stepped off his porch line and raised his rifle, hands shaking, but the barrel steadying as grief turned into rage. "Rourke!" the old man shouted. "Where's my boy?" Rourke's eyes snapped toward him. "Go home, Mercer." The old man didn't. He took one step forward. "Where is he?" For the first time, Rourke's composure faltered, not because he cared about a father's pain, but because the name had teeth now. The crowd had heard it. The crowd had connected it to Cade's face. Jonah hauled Weller up the steps, shoving him through the door. "Pastor!" Jonah shouted. "Lock it!" The pastor fumbled with the heavy bar, hands trembling. Cade and Jonah slammed the church doors shut together, muscles straining as the wood met the frame. Outside, Rourke's voice rose, furious. "Burn it!" Jonah's blood went ice. Lark spun, eyes wide. "He'll do it!" Cade's face twisted. Let him try with half the town watching." Jonah pressed his forehead to the door, listening. Boots on the steps, men shouting, someone dragging something heavy. Barrels, oil, a torch scraping against stone. Rourke had already crossed that line once tonight. He'd burn a church if it meant burying the truth. Jonah turned back into the sanctuary. The church was packed now, townsfolk pouring in, crying, praying, shouting. June lay on a pew, pale. May held Toby close, both shaking. Pike lay near the altar, barely breathing, eyes half open. Amos Klein stood near the pulpit, face lit by lanterns, staring at the crowd like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. Weller sank to his knees, sobbing silently. Jonah lifted Pike's whistle again, eyes hard. He looked at Amos. "You said one page can hang a town." Amos nodded, voice hoarse. "If it gets out." Jonah's jaw clenched. "Then we make it get out without a wire." Outside, the scrape of a torch against the church door grew louder. Rourke's voice boomed through the wood, no longer smooth. "Open, or you all die holy." Jonah raised the whistle, and before anyone could stop him, he blew, long and savage, until his lungs burned, the shriek echoing through the sanctuary and out the cracked window seams into the storm, a call not for law, not for mercy, a call for every ranch within miles to wake up and ride. and as the whistle's last note died, the first lick of flame touched the church door from the outside. Flame crept along the church door like a living thing, finding seams in the oak, licking at old pitch in the grain of the wood. Smoke pushed in through cracks, thin at first, then thicker, stinging eyes and throats. The sanctuary filled with the sharp scent of burning oil and panic. The pastor grabbed a bucket from beside the baptismal font and threw water at the door. It hissed and steamed, buying seconds and nothing more. "Back!" Jonah shouted to the crowd. "Away from the entrance!" People stumbled deeper into the pews, clutching lanterns, children, each other. A woman screamed that God was punishing them. A man shouted that Rourke was the devil. Someone began praying loud enough to drown out their own fear. Cade moved to a side window and wiped frost off the glass with his sleeve. Outside, through the swirling snow, torchlight bobbed and flared. Shadows moved in a tight half-circle around the steps, men shouting, horses stamping, Rourke's voice, close and furious, cutting through it all. "Keep it burning! Don't let them breathe!" Lark shoved her shoulder against the wall beside the door, pistol in both hands, jaw clenched. "He'll burn it down," she said, voice flat with certainty. "He'll burn everyone in here and call it an accident." Jonah's gaze snapped to Pike on the floor near the altar. The sheriff's face was waxy, lips blue at the edges, chest barely lifting. His eyes were open just enough to track motion. He looked at Jonah like he wanted to say something and couldn't push it past blood. Jonah knelt beside him. "Pike," he said hard, "you know a way out." Pike's mouth moved, a wet cough, nothing. Jonah leaned closer, ear near Pike's lips. Pike's whisper finally scraped out, thin as a wire. "Basement," Jonah's head snapped up. "What?" Pike swallowed, grimacing. "Old tunnel, coal chute, behind altar?" Jonah's pulse steadied. A tunnel meant distance from fire. Distance meant time. He stood fast and looked at the pastor. "Where's the trap door?" The pastor blinked, stunned. "Trap? What?" Jonah pointed toward the altar. "Under, now!" The pastor stumbled forward, frantic, lantern shaking. Amos Klein moved too, kneeling and groping under the altar cloth like a man who'd been waiting for someone to ask the right question. His fingers found a ring in the wood. "Here," Amos rasped. Cade shoved aside the altar rail and hauled. The trapdoor resisted, swollen with age. He jerked harder. It cracked open with a groan, and cold, stale air rose from below, smelling of damp stone and old coal. A woman cried out, "No!" Jonah's voice cut through the sanctuary. "You want to die praying or you want to live moving? One line, down!" May clutched Toby tighter. Toby was shaking so hard his teeth clicked. "Dark," he whimpered. May's voice broke. "It's okay, baby, it's okay." It wasn't. June moaned faintly from the pew where she lay, face gray, eyes half open. Cade's head snapped toward her. "Cade," Jonah said, "you take June first." Cade hesitated, torn between moving and fighting. Then he scooped June up with both arms, her head lolling against his shoulder, and carried her toward the trap door. Lark moved to help, but Jonah grabbed her sleeve. "You last," he said. "Gun up. Watch the windows." Lark's eyes flashed. "You're not staying." Jonah's voice was iron. "I'm not, but we don't go blind." Cade lowered June into the hole, feet first. A man from the crowd reached down, helping take her weight as she disappeared into the dark. June made a thin sound, then was gone. Smoke thickened. The door crackled louder. The pastor threw another bucket. The water steamed away like a lie. Outside, a heavy thump hit the church door, something battering now, not just fire. The oak shuddered. The bar held, but not forever. "Down!" Jonah roared. "Now!" People surged toward the altar in a messy rush. Jonah forced them into order with his hands and voice, shoving shoulders, pulling sleeves, keeping the weak from being trampled. Amos barked directions like he'd been born to print chaos into paragraphs. "One at a time. Don't shove. You'll kill each other for nothing." May reached the trap door with Toby. Toby dug his heels in, sobbing. May's hands trembled. "I can't!" Jonah crouched beside Toby, face close, voice low and steady, cutting through panic. "Look at me," he said. Toby's eyes found Jonah's, wide and wet. Jonah pulled the peppermint candy from his pocket, the one Toby had clutched earlier, now softened and smeared. Jonah pressed it into Toby's palm. "You keep this," Jonah said. "You hold it tight, you don't let go, and you go down like a brave boy." Toby's fingers closed. The crying hitched. He nodded once, tiny. May swallowed a sob and lowered Toby into the dark. A hand from below took him. May followed immediately, disappearing after him without looking back. A man shouted from the rear pews, "Where are we going?" Jonah didn't lie. "Away from the fire!" Another thump hit the door. This one made dust rain from the rafters. A woman screamed. The flames at the crack flared brighter, oxygen feeding them. Cade reappeared at the edge of the trap door, breathing hard, soot smeared on his cheek. "June's down," he snapped. "She's barely—" "Go," Jonah said. "Get them moving in the tunnel. Don't stop." Cade nodded once and dropped back down. Jonah turned to Pike. The sheriff was still on the floor, eyes half open, body heavy as stone. Jonah knelt and slid his arms under Pike's shoulders. Pike groaned, pain tearing through him. Lark appeared at Jonah's side. "Let me." Jonah shook his head. "Watch the window." Lark's jaw clenched, but she pivoted back, pistol lifted. Her eyes swept the stained glass panes. Snow pressed against them like a hand. Amos dragged Weller toward the trapdoor by the sleeve. The judge was shaking, whispering prayers to a god he'd ignored when money spoke. Amos leaned close and hissed something Jonah couldn't hear. Weller flinched and went down. "Rourke's men are moving," Lark warned, eyes narrowed. "They're not just burning, they're getting ready to rush." Jonah hauled Pike up. Pike's boots dragged, leaving a smear of blood on the floorboards. Jonah's arms burned. Smoke burned worse. "Pike!" Jonah growled. "Stay with me!" Pike's lips trembled. "Should have shot him." Jonah's voice was tight. "Save it." A crack like a gunshot split the air, the church door's bar finally splintering. The door bowed inward under weight and flame. A tongue of fire rolled in, bright and savage, pouring smoke into the sanctuary like a flood. The crowd shrieked and surged. Jonah shoved Pike forward, coughing, eyes watering. "Go!" Jonah screamed. Lark fired twice toward the side window as a shadow moved outside. The shots weren't to kill, just to warn. The shadow ducked. She backed toward the trap door, pistol still up. Jonah reached the altar with Pike. He lowered Pike feet first into the opening. Hands below grabbed him. Pike's head lolled back, eyes rolling. Lark dropped beside Jonah, eyes blazing through smoke. "Now!" she snapped. "Down!" Jonah's gaze flicked to the sanctuary, people disappearing into the trap door, the pastor helping the last of them, Amos already gone. Flames crawling across the pew backs now, catching hymnals, licking dry wood. Then Jonah heard it over the roar, the unmistakable sound of boots on stone steps outside. Closer, faster. Men shouting, not from fear, but from certainty. "They're coming in!" Lark's eyes widened. "If they reach the trap door!" Jonah grabbed her wrist. "Go!" he said. Lark jerked, furious. "You first!" Jonah shoved the half-burned ledger page into her hand. "This lives," he said. "You make it live." Lark stared at the page, then at Jonah, and something in her face tightened like it hurt. She swallowed. "If you die—" Jonah cut her off. "Down!" Lark dropped into the hole, disappearing into darkness, the page clenched like a blade. Jonah spun to the pastor. "You," he barked. "Down, now!" The pastor hesitated, staring at the burning door like he couldn't leave his church to die alone. Jonah grabbed the pastor's collar and shoved him toward the opening. "Your church is people," Jonah snarled. "Move!" The pastor stumbled and went down. Jonah turned back toward the sanctuary just as the front door finally gave. It burst inward in a storm of sparks and smoke. A man in a scarf and coat surged through with a rifle, followed by another with a torch, their faces lit by fire like demons in a story nobody wanted. Jonah raised his rifle and fired. The first man's shoulder jerked. He fell back into the doorway, clogging it. The second man stumbled, torch swinging, flames spilling across the floor. The fire roared. Jonah coughed hard, vision blurring. Heat slammed him. He backed toward the altar, boots slipping on blood and ash. More men pushed through, stepping over their own fallen, guns up, eyes scanning the room. One of them saw the trap door and shouted, triumphant. "There!" Jonah snapped his rifle toward him and fired again. The man dropped, cursing, clutching his leg. But there were too many. Jonah's chest tightened. He glanced down at the trap door, still open, smoke pouring into it now. If he went down, he might lead them straight to the tunnel. He understood, sudden and absolute. The only way the others live is if the trapdoor closes. Jonah grabbed the heavy wooden lid and hauled it up. Smoke rolled around his arms. He shoved it down over the opening. A gunshot cracked and punched into the altar rail inches from Jonah's hand. Splinters tore his knuckles. He gritted his teeth and shoved harder. The lid slammed shut. Jonah dropped his weight onto it and jammed the iron ring into its notch, locking it from above. He heard muffled pounding from below, Cade or Lark realizing what he'd done. Jonah's breath tore through smoke. He staggered back from the sealed trapdoor, eyes burning. Rourke's men advanced, guns leveled, silhouettes in orange firelight. One of them laughed. "Hero!" Jonah raised his rifle one last time, barrel wavering, lungs screaming, and in the doorway, framed by flame and snow, Silas Rourke appeared, coat untouched, face calm, eyes cold as glass. He looked at Jonah like he was studying an animal that had finally stopped running. "You see," Rourke said softly, "this is why nobody remembers the brave." Jonah's finger tightened on the trigger, and the ceiling above the altar groaned, a deep, terrible sound, as burning beams finally gave way. The beam above the altar let out a low, splitting groan, wood surrendering after a lifetime of holding prayers and winter weight. Jonah looked up just as the ceiling sagged, ember-bright rafters bowing like a spine breaking. Rourke stood in the doorway, framed by fire and snow, perfectly still, watching the collapse with the patience of a man who'd paid for it. Jonah's rifle was up, but his lungs were full of smoke, and his eyes were tearing so hard the world swam. He could shoot, maybe. He could hit a shadow, maybe. But the church was dying around him, and every second he stayed alive above that trapdoor was a second. Rourke's men stayed focused on him instead of tearing up the floor to find the others. So Jonah made his choice without ceremony. He turned his back on Rourke, not in surrender, in purpose. He grabbed the nearest fallen pew and heaved it across the altar area, wedging it hard against the trapdoor seam where the iron ring sat. Then he kicked a burning hymn bench into the pile, feeding flame into the barricade until it became a wall of heat no hand wanted to cross. A man shouted, "He's blocking it!" Another voice, angry and sharp, "Get around!" Jonah coughed, tasting blood. He staggered toward the side aisle, dragging their attention with him. Every step was heavy, boots sticking to ash and melted wax. He could hear the muffled pounding from below, fists on wood, frantic, furious. He didn't answer it. If he answered, he'd break. Rourke stepped into the sanctuary, boots crunching on embers like he was walking through his own kitchen. His men fanned out, rifles up, faces hidden behind scarves, eyes bright with the thrill of finishing something. "Leave the floor," Rourke said calmly. "Let it burn. Kill him and go." A gunman lifted his rifle. Jonah moved before the shot. He lunged toward the side window and slammed his shoulder into stained glass. It exploded outward in a spray of colored shards, and cold air hit his face like a slap from the living world. He jammed the rifle through the broken frame and fired once into the night, not at a man, at a horse tied in the yard. The horse screamed and reared, snapping its rope. Chaos erupted outside, hooves pounding, men cursing, lanterns swinging. Rourke's men swore and shifted, momentarily distracted. Jonah took that heartbeat and threw himself through the window. Glass tore his coat, sliced his forearm. He hit the snow hard, rolling, air knocked out of him. The cold burned his lungs, but it also cleared them. He sucked in one clean breath and forced himself up. The church behind him roared like a furnace. Flames clawed from the doorway. Smoke poured into the storm. In the churchyard, Rourke's riders scrambled to control panicked horses. Town lanterns bobbed farther down the hill, more people coming, drawn by the whistle and the fire, and Judge Weller's shout. The yard had become too public, too loud, too expensive. Jonah staggered toward the graveyard fence line, using headstones for cover. A shot cracked behind him, punching a chunk of stone from an old marker. He ducked, teeth clenched, and kept moving. Rourke stepped out of the church doorway into the snow, coat still absurdly clean, face lit by orange firelight. He watched Jonah limp along the headstones, and his voice carried, smooth and certain. "You can run all night, Crow, but you can't unring a bell." Jonah didn't answer. He kept moving, because breath was more useful than words. Then he heard a different sound, wheels on packed snow, a wagon moving fast through the back lane behind the churchyard. Not Rourke's, too light. Too desperate. He turned his head and caught it, a familiar pair of bay horses surging through the dark, Pete's wagon cutting behind the cemetery wall. They'd gotten out. For a second, relief hit Jonah so hard his knees nearly buckled. Then it turned into something sharper: fear. Because if they were moving, it meant someone below had found another way out, or Cade had broken through the tunnel's end. Either way, Rourke would chase the moving target. Jonah forced himself upright and did the only thing he could do now. He made himself the louder target. He stepped out from behind a headstone into open snow and fired twice into the air. The shots cracked over the churchyard, cutting through confusion like a whip. Every head turned. Riders' bodies pivoted. Rourke's gaze snapped to Jonah. Jonah shouted, raw and savage, "Here!" Rourke's lips curved. "There you are." Two gunmen raised rifles toward Jonah. Before they could fire, a shout rose from the hill road. Dozens of voices at once, angry, awake, coming fast with hoofbeats underneath. The whistle had done its work. Ranchers and hands were riding in, drawn by fire and gunshots, and a sense that something had finally gone too far. "What's happening?" someone bellowed. A rider answered, "Rourke's men burned the church." That wasn't Jonah's voice. That was a town voice, a witness voice. Rourke's jaw tightened for the first time in hours. He didn't like variables. He lifted one hand, subtle, and his men hesitated, guns still up, but their eyes now tracking the incoming riders, calculating. The crowd of lanterns at the church steps swelled. People poured out of houses, drawn by the fire's light. Someone screamed that Sheriff Pike was inside. Someone shouted that Pike had been shot by Rourke's men. Judge Weller's name rolled through the night like a curse. Rourke took one step back, then another. Not retreat, repositioning. Jonah's lungs burned, his legs shook. He could feel warm blood running down his forearm into his glove. Rourke's eyes stayed locked on him. "You think this changes anything?" he said, voice low now, meant only for Jonah across the snow. "By morning, they'll be ashamed they ever looked my way." Jonah's voice came out hoarse, but it carried enough. "By morning," he rasped, "they'll remember the smell." Rourke's smile faded. "You're stubborn." Jonah lifted his chin. "You're scared." For the first time, that landed, not because Jonah had power, because the town had eyes. Rourke didn't answer. He turned his head and spoke softly to one of his men. The man nodded and melted into shadow toward the back lane, toward the wagon. Jonah saw it. His stomach dropped. They were still going after the kids. Jonah tried to run and his body screamed. He stumbled, caught himself on a headstone, vision tunneling. And then, from the church doorway, a deep grinding roar rose, the sound of the roof finally collapsing in full. The steeple shuddered and fell inward with a crash that shook the ground. Fire belched upward in a towering plume. The whole yard lit up bright as day. And in that sudden light, Jonah saw everything clearly for a heartbeat. Rourke's men, their faces, their weapons. The path of the wagon cutting behind the cemetery. The ranchers cresting the hill road, rifles visible on saddles. Townfolk screaming and pointing, witnesses. The one thing Rourke couldn't buy back once it was seen. Jonah lifted his rifle with shaking arms and fired at the ground in front of the man slipping toward the wagon. Snow exploded at the man's feet. He froze, turning his head. "Not them!" Jonah roared, voice shredding. The man hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Because the first wave of ranch riders hit the churchyard gate, half a dozen men on horses, faces hard, guns up, and behind them more coming fast, lanterns swinging. "Rourke!" one of them shouted. "Drop it!" Rourke's men raised rifles in response, but the moment had shifted. It wasn't one fugitive against law now. It was a town waking up against a man who'd finally shown teeth. Rourke's eyes flicked over the incoming riders, the crowd, the burning church behind him. He made a decision as clean as a coin toss. He raised his voice, suddenly loud and calm again, aimed at everyone. "This is an illegal riot," he called. "Anyone who points a weapon at me will answer to the court." A rancher laughed, harsh. "What court? Yours?" the crowd murmured, angry. Rourke's jaw tightened. He turned and walked, actually walked toward the street, letting his men form around him like a moving wall. He wasn't fleeing in panic, he was withdrawing in control, because control was his real weapon. As he passed Jonah's line of sight, he looked back one last time. His voice was soft, almost affectionate. "You saved them for tonight," Rourke said. "You didn't save them from me." Then he vanished into the storm shadow with his men, slipping away before the crowd could harden into certainty. Jonah stood in the snow among headstones, swaying, rifle slipping in his grip. The church burned behind him like a funeral pyre. The town's voices rose around him, shouts, prayers, accusations, names thrown like stones. A rider slid off his horse near Jonah and grabbed his arm to steady him. "Crow," the man said, breath steaming. "Where are the kids?" Jonah's throat worked. He pointed with his chin toward the back lane. "Wagon," he rasped. "They're headed out." The rider nodded and shouted to others, and horses surged toward the lane, chasing the wagon's path, chasing the only thing that mattered. Jonah's knees buckled. He dropped to one knee in the snow, head spinning. And then, through the roar of the fire and the town's panic, he heard it. Faint at first, then clearer as it came closer. The squeal of wagon wheels. Pete's wagon was circling back into the churchyard shadows, not fleeing anymore. Coming back because the riders had met them on the lane and turned them toward safety. Jonah lifted his head. He saw May's face in the wagon bed, ash-smudged, eyes wide. Toby pressed against her, clutching the peppermint like a talisman. Cade sat on the rear rail, rifle across his lap, jaw clenched. Lark crouched beside Pike, who was still breathing, barely, but breathing. Amos Klein sat hunched with the half-burned page clutched to his chest like scripture. They were alive. They rolled past Jonah, and Lark's eyes found his. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Lark raised the page, just a flash, so Jonah could see the ink still there, stubborn against smoke. Jonah tried to stand and nearly fell. Cade jumped down, caught him by the arm. "You idiot," Cade growled, voice cracking. "You almost—" Jonah shook his head weakly. "You got out." Cade's grip tightened. "We did. Because the tunnel ended behind the parson's shed like Pike said. You locked it, and we went another way." Jonah nodded, relief hitting him again like a weight. Amos leaned out of the wagon bed, eyes blazing. "This page goes to the railroad office," he rasped. "They've got their own wire. Rourke can't cut what he doesn't own." Jonah's chest tightened. Good. The pastor stumbled out into the yard, sobbing at the sight of his church burning. Ranchers were shouting orders. Townfolk were pointing toward the hotel, toward the street Rourke had vanished down, demanding someone do something, anyone. Jonah stared at the flames until his eyes burned. Rourke was gone for now, but for the first time, he'd had to leave. Jonah turned to Lark and Amos, voice rough and low. "Get that page out of this county tonight." Amos nodded, hard. "It's already gone. 2 riders, separate roads." Jonah exhaled, a broken sound that was almost a laugh. Then Pike coughed, wet, violent, and his eyes rolled back. Cade and Lark moved instantly, hands on him, trying to keep him with them. Jonah stepped closer, swaying, and looked down at the sheriff who'd finally chosen a side too late. "Hold on," Jonah whispered. Pike's lips moved, barely forming words. His eyes fluttered open just long enough to find Jonah's face. And then, with the last of his strength, he mouthed something Jonah read more than heard. "Finish it." Pike's eyes went still. The church burned. The town stood awake in the snow, finally seeing what it had been living with. And somewhere in the dark beyond the ridge, Silas Rourke rode toward another safe house, already planning how to bury tonight under tomorrow's lies. Only this time, a single page of ink was racing down the rails toward people who didn't owe him anything.